Chapter 176 Become My Woman. I don't like such a demon's sword. Guillaume seemed to have her thoughts exposed by Darren, and her face was slightly red. She raised the golden sword at her waist and raised her smooth neck proudly. My golden sword is so beautiful. Darren said with some laughter. Okay, I know you are so powerful. If he remembered correctly, this golden sword was a birthday gift given to her by the Crane staff officer on her 5th birthday. At the age of 15, he already holds a famous sword like the Great Blade Nijichigong. This is equivalent to driving a Lamborghini at the age of 15 on Earth, and it is a limited edition of 21 in the world. This person is really incomparable. When I was 15 years old, what did I hold? Well, it should be a toilet brush. But then again, Darren did not let Guillaume touch Yanma for her own good. With Guillaume's current strength, it is probably far from enough to tame Yanma. If he is not careful, Yanma may even drain his domineering and weird abilities and endanger his life. Guillaume snorted, then looked at the motionless Yanmo in front of him curiously, and said, "How did you call it over?" Darren smiled and said, "Have you forgotten my devil fruit ability?" He blinked at Guillaume. "Now I am also half a great swordsman." "You, great swordsman?" Guillaume seemed to have heard a joke, and said proudly, "Although your strength is indeed very strong, you don't know swordsmanship." Darren shrugged. "Can't you use a sword if you don't know swordsmanship?" He walked into Guillaume, hugged her waist as the latter whispered, and then stepped onto Yanmo's blade. You can't." Guillaume's beautiful eyes widened instantly, as if she thought of something absurd. "You are wasting God's gift. Hold on." Boom. Under the effect of the magnetic field, the two stepped on the peerless demon sword and flew into the sky. 1 minute later, Darren and the others landed in an uninhabited area docked at an abandoned port in Marineford. "You bastard, you don't respect the sword at all." Seeing Darren, waving it away, to Yanmo, Guillaume couldn't help but grit his teeth and said, "That's because you don't know the price I paid to feed it." Darren rolled his eyes unhappily. Guillaume also knew that there was no way to reason with Darren, so he looked around angrily. The night was intoxicating, and there was an endless sea in front of him. The sea water was shining under the lights of the observation deck and the civilian area in the distance. "Why did you bring me here?" Guillaume frowned. "It's New Year's Eve, I have to watch the fireworks," Darren said with a smile. "But the fireworks are all in the civilian area, not here." Before Guillaume finished speaking, a patch of orange-red flames suddenly bloomed in the distant sky. Bang! 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 A patch of orange-red flames bloomed in the night sky, and a long rain of fire fell into the sea like a ribbon, reflecting the dark world in a colorful and splendid way. "This is..." Guillaume's eyes gradually widened, as if she saw an incredible picture. She tried hard to identify, and suddenly found that in the night, a piece of artillery shells placed on the abandoned turret flew into the sky strangely, and then exploded in the sky. Guillaume seemed to realize something and turned his head to look at Darren. Between the latter's slender fingers, a faint arc of electricity jumped. This gorgeous fireworks in the sky were actually created by this guy controlling the explosion of artillery shells. Guillaume stared at all this blankly, and turned his head subconsciously. She saw Darren smiling at her. Guillaume's eyes suddenly became dazed. The fireworks were brilliant. But the Commodore's eyes at this moment were more charming than the fireworks. "Happy New Year." Darren smiled and explained. "You can't blame me for wasting military resources. This port has been abandoned, and the shells are basically abandoned. There is no point in leaving them there." As he spoke, he suddenly felt warm lips pressed against his mouth. It surged like a raging fire. "Want me?" Guillaume's panting murmurs sounded between his lips. Darren felt his brain go blank with a bang, and he stammered, "That. I have to go back." Guillaume twisted Darren's waist and said viciously, "Are you still a man?" Darren was startled. He gritted his teeth. Then he lowered his head deeply. The cannonballs roared like fireworks in the sky, and the sky was filled with meteors. The dark sea was vast and boundless, and 2 snow-white sea fish came out of the water, swaying their shimmering tails to stir the water and swaying ripples. I don't know how much time has passed. On the edge of the abandoned port. The fireworks have stopped, the world is quiet, and only the sound of the waves keeps echoing. A man and a woman sat on the shore, with clothes scattered on the ground beside them. Darren was naked from the waist up, revealing hideous scars all over his body, and biting a little bit in his mouth. Lit cigarette. Dion sat quietly beside him, wearing a wide cloak and looking at the sea in the distance. The slightly salty sea breeze blew her hair, and she sat there, letting her slender white legs hang naturally. She wore a pair of white high-heeled sandals, with her crystal pink toes exposed. So, what are we doing? Dion had regained his composure at this time, with a blush on his face after the joy, and asked in a low voice. Darren exhaled a stream of smoke from his mouth. He knew that there must be no hesitation now, and he said in a clear and firm voice. Be my woman. He put out the cigarette and reached out to gently hold Dion's face. I like you. Dion's face was slightly red, and Darren's bold remarks made her heart beat wildly, but she bit her lower lip and said. Are you sure? I'm sure. Darren nodded without hesitation. Humph, but I don't speak well and have a bad temper. Dion snorted. Darren. Well, women really hold grudges. In my opinion, those are all your lovely places. Darren's nonsense almost came out instinctively. Dion pouted. Tisk, I don't believe you, you bastard. But his tone had softened. Darren smiled and took her hand. I'll take you home. Dion raised his eyebrows and sneered. Then what? You can go home to be with your wife. Ah. Darren's mouth twitched. Before he could say anything, Dion had already pounced on him again. Her tight and powerful legs clamped his waist. Looking down at Darren, Dion's eyes flashed with a strong desire to win. I can't let you go back easily. Wait. Darren's face immediately showed panic. An hour later. Darren covered his waist and limped back to the family compound. The moment he opened the door by holding the wall, his face suddenly froze. I saw Tien Yushi standing in front of the classical screen, wearing a pink kimono dotted with cherry blossoms, looking like she had been waiting for a long time, and said with a smile. My husband, let me serve you. Darren's face stiffened for a moment. He then forced a smile that was uglier than crying. Okay. Please give me everything, thank you very much. Chapter 177 How about being entangled with domineering? At the same time. A certain sea area in the New World. An illegal zone on a neutral island. Tavern. Ha 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 ha. Daddy is treating us today, we won't go home until we are drunk. Marco, with his pineapple hair, stood at a table, raising his beer glass with a red face. Roar. The other members of the Whitebeard Pirates also raised their glasses and laughed heartily. Hey, you guys. Whitebeard shouted helplessly, but the next second he was surrounded by his own crew and forced to drink, and soon he was integrated into the lively and joyful atmosphere. The crowd sang and danced, venting their long-suppressed desires and emotions. Some people used beer bottles as microphones to sing songs. Some people laughed. Some people got drunk and cried. Some people just sat there quietly, watching their companions in a mess with a smile on their faces. Hey, Odin, don't sit there in a daze, everyone is happy. Come and have a drink too. Marco suddenly seemed to have discovered something, and suddenly his eyes lit up. He ran to a corner of the tavern excitedly, hugged Kazuki Odin, who was wearing a samurai uniform, and said with a breath of alcohol. What are you thinking about? Kazuki Odin, who was originally in a trance, suddenly came back to his senses, looked at Marco, who was drunk in front of him, and smiled. Nothing. Marco rolled his eyes and suddenly asked. Are you missing home? Kazuki Odin laughed as if he heard a joke. How could it be? My dream since childhood is to travel the sea. Becoming a free pirate, traveling around the world, seeing all the beautiful scenery of this sea, this is worth it for me, Kazuki Odin, to come to this world. Compared to this vast and endless sea, Wano country is too narrow. Marco frowned and asked curiously. Since you don't miss home, why are you absent-minded every day, often sitting alone at the bow in a daze? Kazuki Oden pretended to be calm and waved his hand. Nothing, just dazed. Marco stared at Kazuki Oden's face with suspicion, muttering. Is it because of the loss to the Navy named Darren? That guy is very powerful. He even destroyed Kaido's base camp. Even a terrifying guy like World Destroyer, Bandai Waldo fell into his hands. It's not unfair for you to lose to him. Just win back when you have a chance in the future. Of course I know that the appearance of that navy proves that my idea of going to sea is right. Otherwise, I will stay in Wano country and never meet such a powerful opponent in my life. He subconsciously pressed the handle of the Tenuhazen at his waist, his eyes flashing with a strong fighting spirit. Next time we meet, I will win, and I will take Yanmo back from his hands. On his waist, besides the aim no Habezen, there was also a black scabbard. Seeing his carefree look, Marco's doubts deepened. Since he was not upset because of losing the battle with the Navy, then what was the reason? As the chief steward of the Whitebeard pirates, Marco was much more attentive to other crew members than the rough Whitebeard. Looking at the samurai in front of him taking a sip of beer, Marco suddenly seemed to remember something and asked tentatively. Are you thinking about women? Puff. Kazuki Oden sprayed a mouthful of beer on Marco's face. He shook his head with a flushed face and coughed violently. I didn't. Marco wiped the wine off his face speechlessly, and the corners of his mouth twitched. Come on, it's too obvious. Is it that beautiful girl? I think her name is Tianyushi. Marco asked in a low voice. Kazuki Oden saw that he couldn't hide it, so he was silent for a while, and suddenly sighed. I don't understand why. He scratched his head. It was just a chance meeting, but watching her being taken away by the Navy named Darren, I always felt like I had lost something very important. The bedroom was in a mess. White socks, white kimonos, purple sashes were scattered all over the floor, and even the air was filled with a sultry temperature. Darren weakly climbed up, holding his lower back with one hand, and carefully covering the quilt for Ashi who had fallen asleep with the other hand. He glanced at Tianyushi, whose face was full of satisfaction and whose mouth corners were slightly raised, and exhaled lightly, then walked out of the room quietly. It's really too painful. Wearing a pair of shorts, Darren sat on the threshold in front of the house without any posture, lit a cigarette, supported his cheek with his head down, and muttered. Are we really going to set the mountain on fire? But this idea was rejected as soon as it came up. No. Darren shook his head and shuddered. Although Huo Shaoshan didn't look like a gossiper, that overly gentle guy looked like he couldn't keep a secret. What if it got out? Would his reputation still be there? No, that's not right. My reputation in the headquarters was not so good. But I can't just give up like this. As a man, I can't accept that I'm not good enough. It seems that I have to think of other ways. Life return. This doesn't seem to work. That thing consumes my energy, not just a fatal injury. This is not something that life return can solve. Darren held a cigarette in one hand and rubbed the stubble on his chin with the other hand, thinking. How about, cover it with armed color domineering? As soon as this thought came up, Darren couldn't help but brighten up. This might work. I just don't know if it's too powerful. Well, if the founder of Armament Hockey knew that someone in the future would use this ability to do that, he would probably be so angry that his coffin would explode. Darren's thoughts gradually drifted away, without limit. He sat there smoking, quietly looking up at the quiet starry sky. The sound of Ashi's even breathing in the bedroom behind him kept coming, making him feel peaceful. The soft light under the light, he couldn't help but smile. How long had it been since he had felt so happy and secure? He couldn't remember clearly. Fighting, desire, money, planning. The past life was so clear in his mind. The life in the last life might be comfortable enough, but the memory was already blurred. A cigarette was quickly finished. Darren simply rinsed his mouth, then walked into the room, got into bed, and hugged the sleeping Ashi in his arms. Looking at the face in his arms that was filled with a happy smile, Darren gently kissed her forehead, whispered. Happy New Year. I'll be grateful for everything. Chapter 178. Do you want to learn? On the first day of the 1493rd year of the Haiyuan calendar, Zhongguo was very angry. What the hell is going on? All the ammunition stocks in the abandoned port of D1 have been taken away. In the admiral's office, Zhongguo roared like thunder, spraying the messenger who came to report with spit. He was very angry. Since the defection of Dragon, the military expenditure received by the Navy headquarters from the world government has been greatly reduced. In addition, the erasure of Dragon's identity as a Navy member and the chain of political reactions caused by the fermentation of the incident have already made him, the Admiral of the Navy, overwhelmed. The position of the Admiral of the Navy, which was originally set in stone, was lost, and Zhongguo had to endure the heartache to comfort that bastard Garp. But who will comfort him, the Admiral of the Navy who endures humiliation? Although the D1 port had been abandoned long ago and there were not many ammunition stocks there, it was already late, and even a small mosquito was still meat. This incident almost immediately made Zhongguo explode. That General Zhongguo, after our later investigation, we found that the ammunition stocks were not moved away, but detonated. The messenger carefully observed Zhongguo's face and whispered, "Detonated." Zhongguo raised his eyebrows. The young messenger heard the anger in Zhongguo's tone that was about to be suppressed, and he stammered. "Last night, someone saw from a distance that there was a grand fireworks show in the direction of D1 port. Many people thought it was a New Year's Eve celebration arranged by the headquarters." Zhongguo gritted his teeth when he heard this. But the blue veins on his forehead were so exaggerated that the messenger felt that they would explode at any time. So he dared not delay any longer and hurriedly said, "Early this morning, a soldier came to report that Brigadier General Rogers Darren admitted that he had used the batch of ammunition at Port D1. Darren. Zhongguo was stunned, and then he became furious. Is that stinky boy crazy? A good batch of ammunition, he actually used it to set off fireworks. He thought this was his North Sea. Hey, what's in your hand?" Zhongguo suddenly stopped, and saw the messenger in front of him trembling and handing over an envelope. The envelope has been opened. It was a check. There are many banks in this sea, and the check in front of him is a promissory note from a bank under the world government. Brigadier General Darren said that this time he misappropriated the ammunition to please his lover, and he is willing to compensate for all the expenses and express his deep apologies for the inconvenience caused by this matter. The messenger presented the envelope with both hands and bowed. Looking at the long string of zeros on the check, Zhongguo opened his mouth and accepted it silently. He suddenly felt less angry. After a few seconds of silence, he coughed twice and said calmly, "Well, forget it this time. After all, love is really important. Go back and tell that brat not to make such a big noise next time." "Yes, General Zhongguo." The messenger didn't dare to look up, for fear of seeing some expressions that shouldn't be seen. "By the way, Darren should go back to the training camp today, right?" Zhongguo hid the check, suddenly remembered something, and asked another question. The messenger replied respectfully, "Not yet. I heard that Lieutenant General Garp sent someone to call Brigadier General Darren over early this morning." "Garp." Zhongguo thought for a moment and waved his hand. "Okay, you go first." The messenger bowed again, touched the stack of banknotes in his pocket, and fled out of the office. As the door of the office closed again, Zhongguo stood there for a moment and took out the check again. He suddenly cursed fiercely. This prodigal boy is really willing to spend a lot of money. 200 million Baileys just to set off a fireworks show. Darren was panicked. Standing on the abandoned port where the fireworks had just been set off last night, he looked at Garp, who was full of gloom and murderous, and felt the majestic momentum coming towards him. He was panicked. At this moment, his brain began to work rapidly. Did he act too hard, and this old man blamed him for beating up Dragon? Or did his relationship with Dion finally get discovered, and he felt that his cabbage was being eaten by pigs, so he came to beat him up to vent his anger? Just as Darren was thinking about it, Garp, who was wearing a dog head hat, suddenly took a step and walked towards him without saying a word. The heavy footsteps, the tightly clenched fists, and the terrifying momentum that kept rising made Darren's throat roll. That, Vice Admiral Garp, why did you ask me to come here? I didn't do anything. All the actions were instructed by General Sengoku, so you can't blame me. Darren's mouth twitched, and his body subconsciously stepped back. If it were anyone else, he wouldn't be scared at all. But in front of him. The guy in front of him is Garp. The man who stands at the top of the sea. And his son just defected from the Navy. He must be extremely angry. Now he probably wants to find someone to vent his anger. The most important thing is that Garp is the only unreasonable and stubborn person in the Navy. I am still sore and weak now. If I get beaten up by him, I will be out of action for several days. When Darren retreated, he found that his back hit something hard. He looked back. It was a huge abandoned warship that was 20 meters high. However, at the moment Darren turned around, a terrifying and oppressive feeling like a landslide suddenly surged in front of him. At this moment, his heart was beating uncontrollably, and the blood in his body seemed to boil instantly under the pressure of death. Darren's body was instantly tense to the extreme, and he naturally entered a fighting state. But when he looked forward, an ordinary fist had been continuously enlarged in the reflection of his pupils. Darren's pupils shrank into fine needles. This punch. He simply couldn't describe it in words. There was no domineering power, no vision, no fist wind, no flame, even the speed was so slow that it was clearly visible. But at this moment, Darren's heart suddenly surged with such a feeling of near despair. He couldn't take this punch. So, Darren could only watch Garp's punch approaching his face at an ordinary speed. It brushed past the hair and hit the abandoned warship behind him. Bang! A slight muffled sound came out. It was a plain sound. It was like the sound of a child tremblingly waving a wooden stick and hitting the wall. But the next second, boom! The entire huge abandoned warship completely exploded into fragments all over the sky. The violent wind of the raging waves passed across the ground, destroying everything behind Darren, including the warship and several heavy military artillery emplacements, like a shock wave. Gurgle. Darren swallowed his saliva. Vice Admiral Garp. Before he finished speaking, Garp, who had been lowering his head, suddenly raised his head and grinned at him. Want to learn? I'll teach you. I'm grateful for everything. Chapter 179 Pure Power. It scared me. Looking at Garp, who was wearing a dog-head military cap and grinning at him, Darren's mouth twitched and he complained in his heart. If you want to teach me physical skills, just say it directly. If you want to show the power of Iron Fist, just say it in advance. It's so scary. But the power of this punch is really terrifying. There was no domineering aura, no obvious accumulation of power, no powerful burst of power, and no domineering aura. It just looked like a plain, even, ordinary punch, but it caused such exaggerated destructive power. The oppressive feeling like 1,000-meter-high mountain collapsing and crushing in front of the eyes gave people an illusion that they could not compete with it at all. Under the lock of this punch, Darren even had a feeling that he could not dodge. It was a high combination of momentum and exquisite force skills. I am afraid it is similar to Roger's God Avoidance. He is worthy of being the man who stands at the top of the sea in terms of combat power. Vice Admiral Garp, what do you mean? Darren quickly gathered his scattered thoughts and asked. Garp slowly retracted his fist, raised his hand and patted Darren on the shoulder, and said with a smile. You should know that I have always admired you, a kid. He exhaled a long breath of turbid air, with a sigh in his eyes. I have read the battle report. You have done a good job. I have caused you a lot of trouble with the matter of that brat in my family. So he wants to repay his favor. This thought flashed through Darren's mind, and he smiled and shook his head and said. Vice Admiral Garp is too polite. I am a friend of Dragon, and I am just following the instructions of General Sengoku. It is nothing. Garp laughed loudly at the words. You are good at everything, but you are too shrewd and cautious. If I didn't know that you have a crazy obsession with fighting and killing, my physical skills are really not suitable for you. He paused, then laughed. Darren, don't refuse. Your strength has reached a very critical stage. There are many people in this sea. Countless strong men have been stuck at this bottleneck all their lives. Although I don't know how much you can learn from me, at least. Garp straightened his chest and put his hands on his hips with a proud look. I can definitely teach better than that guy Zepha. Darren. Why do I always feel that the most important reason why you are willing to teach me is this? But then again, Garp's teaching level may not be as meticulous and professional as Zepha's, or even a style similar to free range, but the level of the students he teaches is indeed good. Kuzan is the best example. In the original plot, when he was young, Kuzan had already learned all the knowledge taught in the training camp, and then took the initiative to find Garp, wanting to become stronger. Under Garp's guidance, he gained all-round enhancement and finally became one of the top combat forces. Even later in the Beehive Island plot, he and Garp staged a fierce battle between master and apprentice. Another student of Garp is Kobe. After 2 years of hands-on training by Garp, Kobe went from being a young man who could only cry and shout, "Truce," in the war to an elite of the Navy Headquarters Secret Special Force, SWORD. He shined in the battle with the Blackbeard pirates on Beehive Island and received an epic enhancement. Although it was due to Oda's forced enhancement, it was enough to prove that Garp's teaching level was still good. The most important thing was that Darren himself was very envious of Garp's physical skills. Although he has now mastered big moves such as magnetic sword control and electromagnetic gun, the factor that determines the victory or defeat in the fight between real strong men still has to fall on physical skills. Thank you, Vice Admiral Garp. So Darren no longer refused hypocritically. Ha 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 ha, it's better to be more straightforward. Garp laughed heartily. Come with me. He took Darren to another open space in the port, where several huge medium-sized warships were stranded. The warships had long been abandoned, and the heavy artillery originally loaded on them had been unloaded, and some of the recyclable materials had been dismantled, leaving basically only the main structure of the hull. Under the frost of the years, the surface of the abandoned warships was covered with spider webs, the heavy anchors were rusty, and the surface of the hull was covered with scars, tilted and piled there. Such abandoned warships are not uncommon in the headquarters. In the case of naval battles, attacking the opponent's hull is the most direct and effective means of attack. Not only the Navy does this, but also the pirates do so. At least with such a large number of warships in the Navy headquarters, the number of warships retired each year is not small. The cost of repairs, manufacturing new warships, weapons, daily maintenance. As the behind-the-scenes leader of the North Sea Fleet, Darren knows better than anyone how expensive it is to maintain a powerful fleet. No wonder Zhongguo is worried about military expenses every day. Darren, what do you think is the most powerful force in this sea? Garp looked up at the 2 huge abandoned warships in front of him, and suddenly asked a question, interrupting Darren's meditation. Darren was slightly startled, but before he could speak, Garp continued to speak. Is it all kinds of incredible devil fruit abilities? Is it the domineering that can capture the entity of the ability user? Or is it the domineering that is said to be able to shock people and represent will? No, none of them. Garp shook his head decisively. These things may make you a strong man, but they will never make you the top existence in this sea. Darren said thoughtfully. What do you think, Vice Admiral Garp? Garp smiled, raised his right hand, and clenched his 5 fingers into a fist. At the moment when the fist was clenched, Darren vaguely saw a black and red lightning blooming in Garp's palm, and then it was quickly crushed. Garp's eyes burst into a fiery and confident light, and he said in a deep voice. It is pure power that has been tempered for thousands of times. The above-mentioned powers, taken out alone, do not have much meaning in the eyes of a true strong man, but if you can perfectly integrate and gather all these powers after thousands of tempering special training, that is the strongest power. Pure and incomparable power. He turned his head to look at Darren and said with a smile. Your physical fitness is very strong, even comparable to those monsters born different from ordinary people, but your power is not pure enough. At the moment of attack, the power you mastered was not well integrated, so the power that burst out seemed loose. This is what I want to teach you. I am grateful for everything. Chapter 180. Do you understand? Pure power that has been tempered for thousands of times. Are you sure it's not? Serious punch. Darren complained in his heart. However, after listening to Garp's serious and powerful words, he was still patient, chewing on the meaning of the words carefully, and soon he became thoughtful. Indeed, as Garp said, his combat power was largely stacked. With a strong physique as the foundation, he continuously stacked armed color domineering, various fighting skills, and even devil fruit abilities on this foundation, like stacking blocks. Finally, what was built was a rough, fighting machine that could only attack with physique and strength. But in fact, when fighting, can he make the most of his strong physique? Is the fusion and operation between physique, strength and speed, domineering, and devil fruit smooth and perfect enough? Has his maximum combat potential been released to the maximum extent? Before Garp's words, Darren had never thought about such a question. Because of the existence of the innate perception ability, his past practice has been targeted to improve the various values of the personal panel. Strengthen your body by resisting blows and tempering your body with lightning. Improve your ability by dragging warships with excessive weight strength. Improve your speed by dodging bullets and bursting at short distances. Almost all training is highly targeted. This method is not bad, but has an excellent advantage, that is, Darren can clearly find out his shortcomings through the data panel, and constantly find new ways to practice to break through his limits. There is no doubt that for the early stage, this is the most effective and fastest way to improve strength. But, can this method really make a top strong man? It is unlikely. Darren subconsciously thought of a character who appeared in the Dressrosa incident in the original plot. The king of the kingdom of Proteans, Elisabello II. This guy is not weak, and is known as the War King. It is said that this man can use his innate strong body to release a heavy punch, King's Fist. With just one blow, he can instantly penetrate the fortress of the enemy country. It is said that even if he is as strong as the 4 emperors, he will be killed on the spot if he is hit. Do you say he is not strong? With the power of that King's Fist, Darren estimated that he might be able to hurt the 4 emperors. But in order to release this punch, Elisabello II needs to warm up for at least an hour before his body can burst out such power. In actual combat, it is simply useless. By the time you finish warming up, you don't know how many times you have died. The situation of Elisabello II is actually somewhat similar to Darren. He also has powerful power, but he has not been able to fully exert this power. It's like a battle fortress with powerful weapons, giving people a loose feeling. For example, it's a high-performance sports car with a powerful engine, excellent chassis and the best gearbox, but lacks good training from technicians. It's just that Darren didn't show it obviously. And now what Garp said is to help Darren fully develop and integrate all the powers and abilities he has. Integrate all the power, and completely release the potential of Darren's supercar. So that's it. Darren murmured softly, his eyes gradually brightening. Then what should I do? He looked at Garp with great interest. Watch it. Garp laughed, took a step forward, exhaled towards his fist, fixed his eyes, and punched a warship in front of him. Bang! The whole warship trembled violently, and countless debris exploded at the point where the fist landed. Do you understand? Garp turned his head and laughed. Darren. I don't understand shit. Isn't this the difference between a serious punch and an ordinary punch? He was full of black lines, and wanted to complain about something. But seeing the proud look on Garp's face, as if he was very satisfied with his teaching method, Darren opened his mouth and couldn't say a word. This is a pudong rooster, no matter how you look at it. It's almost the same as Kaido. The names of the moves are fancy. To put it bluntly, it's the difference between swinging the stick horizontally and vertically, swinging the stick hard and swinging the stick even harder. Well, I didn't make a mistake. You are indeed very suitable to inherit my legacy. Ha 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 ha. Garp saw that Darren didn't say anything, and thought that the latter really understood. He couldn't help but patted the latter's shoulder happily and laughed with his head raised. That, Vice Admiral Garp, have you tried to teach this move to others? Darren asked with a twitch in the corner of his eye. Garp scratched his head and laughed. I guess I did. I told that brat of mine, but he didn't seem to understand. He later thought about the claw instead. And Sakaski. Well, although I don't like that guy's style of doing things, he is a very important talent in the Navy after all. But as soon as I finished speaking, that bastard turned around and ran away without saying a word. He suddenly started to curse. It really makes me angry. The most powerful trick is right in front of them. I explained it so clearly, but they still can't learn it. Darren. It's normal that they can't learn it. Okay, since you understand it, let's get started. Garp shook his head and looked at Darren with interest, his face full of expectation. He pointed at the warship in front of him. The power of a hero does not come out of thin air. Only through repeated tempering can the strongest be forged. You are not allowed to use any devil fruit ability, nor do you allow hockey. Control your power, and pour all your energy into every punch. This warship is your punching bag. At the same time. Training camp, school field. Zephyr looked at the students who had gathered in a queue in front of him, and suddenly frowned and asked. Where is Darren? Hasn't he returned to the headquarters? Where did he go? Everyone was stunned, looked at each other, and then shook their heads at the same time to indicate that they didn't know. Maybe he went to pick up girls somewhere. Cake, who was standing at the front of the queue, pouted and muttered. He turned his head and laughed at Guillaume next to him. After all, you can't expect anything from a scum like him, right, Guillaume? Guillaume looked at him expressionlessly and was silent for a while, said slowly. Darren is just a little fickle, but he is not a bad person. Kaji suddenly widened his eyes and was dumbfounded. Guillaume is actually speaking for Darren. He looked unbelievable, as if he was dreaming. But before he could say anything, Zephyr suddenly burst into a stunned and furious roar. What? That brat was called away by Garp. I beg for everything, and I am grateful. Chapter 181. A serious punch. Concentrate. Every punch of yours must be a punch that implements the will of victory and justice. Only a punch with the confidence of winning can integrate all your messy abilities. Under the scorching sun. In the abandoned port piled with various military wastes, a black figure, breathing heavily under the scorching sun, punched a huge warship in front of him, which was 20 meters high, like a beast. The figure was naked from the waist up, revealing a body covered with various scars. His facial lines were as deep as a steep cliff, and beads of sweat dripped down his black hair and jaw. The muscular body was tanned with a healthy bronze color, and his temperament was wild and unruly. Every time a punch landed, its powerful force was like a tightly twisted hemp rope, bursting out a dull wave of air, making the behemoth in front of him tremble violently. Not far away, Cap, wearing a floral shirt and shorts and flip-flops, was sitting under a simply built parasol, leaning comfortably on a lounge chair, holding a glass of juice in his hand, eating donuts and spurring from time to time. I told you, don't use domineering. I don't use domineering. Darren cursed angrily. This old man was very bad. At first, he pretended to want to practice with me, but after a few days, he showed his true colors. First, he carried a sun umbrella and a lounge chair from somewhere, and then his butt was stuck to the beach chair and never got up again. Ha 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 ha, I know you don't have domineering power, so I just want to remind you. Kapu laughed, his face was as thick as a city wall. Darren. He gritted his teeth and looked at Kapu's comfortable and relaxed look. Even though he couldn't help but feel itchy, his punching movements and speed suddenly increased. Bang bang bang. He simply vented all his anger on the warship in front of him, which was already broken on the surface. Suddenly, wood chips and metal fragments kept flying, and the violent punches even caused the ground under his feet to vibrate significantly. This kid is really a freak. Garp happily drank a mouthful of iced juice, squinted his eyes and looked at Darren's explosive physique like a cheetah, and couldn't help sighing in his heart. Although he had already witnessed Darren's strength with his own eyes, and had heard about the latter's monster-like physique, he had a certain psychological preparation. But after practicing for a few days, Garp was still shocked by Darren's physical fitness. He was invulnerable to swords and guns, water and fire, and had a toughness comparable to or even beyond steel. Even bullets and cannons had no effect on him. Garp also conducted a special experiment on this. It was called testing the physical limit, but in fact Garp was just curious, so he used his own method of throwing shells with his bare hands to bombard Darren. What was the result? After a round of bombardment, Darren's uniform was blown to tatters, and black smoke was coming out of his body. The ground within a radius of 10 meters below his feet was blown down by 1 meter, but he still stood there like nothing happened. What does this mean? Garp looked at Darren, who was punching wildly there, and 2 vicious figures appeared in his mind. Kaido and Big Katakana Middle. Mom. I didn't expect that our navy also had such a freak. Could it be that this kid is not of human blood, but of some strange race? Garp stroked the stubble on his chin, curiously staring at Darren's back, and couldn't help muttering. Why don't we let that bastard Borsellino come to check it out? He suddenly had such an idea, but soon shook his head. Forget it, this is not important. He took a bite of the donut and continued to observe Darren's movements. Well, I have already felt it a little bit, and the power is obviously much more concentrated than before. I have to say that this brat is still working hard. A satisfied smile appeared on the corner of Garp's mouth. In fact, what really satisfied Darren was not his extraordinary physical fitness, but his will that was stronger than the iron body. Garp knew very well how terrifying the intensity of the training plan he arranged was, and it was impossible for a normal person to stick to it. But Darren's performance was completely beyond his expectations. No matter how much sweat he shed or how tired his body was, he never said, tired. This young man is filled with a desire to become stronger, that ordinary people cannot understand, which is persistent, firm, and even crazy. Maybe he will learn it in the end. Garp's eyes flickered, and he smiled and whispered. At this time, a young Navy soldier came quickly. He ran over and saluted Garp breathlessly. Report to Vice Admiral Garp, Mr. Zephyr said the time is up. Garp rolled his eyes unhappily. All right. He put down the donuts and juice and shouted to Darren. Darren, time is up, go to Zephyr. Darren didn't say anything, and his punch speed increased again. The punch, like a storm, suddenly covered a large area of the warship's hull in front. Huh. Garp suddenly raised his eyebrows, and a hint of expectation rose in his eyes. The next second, Darren shouted loudly, his eyes were condensed, the power was generated from his feet, and the muscles of his whole body contracted flexibly. The body was like a precision machine, transmitting this force along the spine to the arm. A punch. Bang. A dull sound came out. The difference is that this punch is different from the previous one. The hull of the warship did not tremble at all. It did not move at all. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Amid Darren's heavy breathing. Amid Garp's excited cheers. Amid the shocked eyes of the Navy soldier who came to convey the order. The wreckage of the warship, which was already in tatters, suddenly exploded into fragments all over the sky. Ha 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 ha. Very good. Garp stood up suddenly, put his hands on his waist and laughed proudly. My teaching method is indeed correct. Although this punch is still far from being truly mastered, it already has that taste. Darren looked at Garp's proud look and was too lazy to complain. He walked over tiredly, put on a large navy cloak, and said to the Navy soldier who was still standing there blankly. Let's go. The Navy soldier swallowed his saliva with a gurgle, retracted his gaze from the land full of waste, and quickly followed. After walking for a while, he finally couldn't suppress his curiosity and asked cautiously in a low voice. Commodore Darren, what's the name of that move just now? Darren paused. He looked up, took out a pack of cigarettes, took out a cigarette and lit it in his mouth. The cool wind blew past, and the white smoke lingered around his face, making him look extremely mysterious. The Navy soldier held his breath and waited quietly. Looking at Darren's serious and lonely look, he knew that the name of this move must be quite impressive. This move. Darren exhaled a long puff of smoke and said lightly. It's called, Serious Punch. The Navy soldier seemed to be struck by lightning. Ask for everything, grateful. Chapter 182 I want to learn observation hockey. Darren didn't know whether this punch was a serious punch or not. Garp's training method was illogical and very strange, beyond Darren's understanding. He just trained according to Garp's method step by step out of pure trust in this, strongest navy. Anyway, it was all training. At his current level of strength, the previous training method that pressed the physiological limit would not improve his own data much. Just at the moment when he threw the last punch just now, Darren did seem to catch something vaguely. It was a fleeting inspiration, a physical feeling that could not be sought. At that moment, Darren seemed to feel that everything in front of him disappeared. That feeling was like using a high-powered telescope, and the field of vision in front of him suddenly shrank and became extremely focused. Everything around him disappeared without a trace, and his brain was calm. Although his body was exhausted to the extreme, the power in his body emerged so naturally, like a spring. At that moment, there was no other distracting thought. Only punching. A sure wind blow. When he came to his senses, the warship in front of him had been completely shattered and turned into a pile of slag. What kind of power was that? While walking towards the training camp, Darren's thoughts kept flying in his mind. If he had to describe the feeling of that punch, Darren estimated that it might not be a specific force-generating technique, not the superposition of his various abilities, and not a rough burst of power, but a mysterious state that could not be explained. The high degree of unity of mind and body skills. Perhaps, this is the key to the entanglement of the domineering color domineering. Such a thought suddenly emerged in Darren's mind. It has been a while since he awakened the domineering color domineering, although he can also rely on his own consciousness to control the release of the domineering color domineering to achieve the effect of deterring the enemy. But he still had no idea about the entanglement of the domineering color domineering. Darren carefully recalled the feeling and state of the punch just now, trying to capture the illusory inspiration. He knew very well that it was just a coincidence. There is still a long way to go before he can truly master the ability to completely control his body. But Darren is not in a hurry. He has always been very patient. Many things cannot be rushed and require time to accumulate. Thinking like this, he has already stepped into the gate of the training camp and came to the training ground. Zeph, wearing a navy cloak, has been waiting here for a long time. Is the training over at Garp? Seeing Darren walk into the training ground, Zephyr, who was biting a cigar in his mouth, French said with dissatisfaction. Darren smiled and nodded. Yes, Mr. Zephyr. HMPH, that bastard Garp took you away without saying anything. Zephyr cursed indignantly. He doesn't even think about what he can teach you with his crude teaching method. Even his own son doesn't want to practice with him. Speaking of Garp's teaching method, Zephyr's tone was quite dissatisfied. Darren smiled and didn't take up the topic. He still remembered the first day he practiced with Garp. The angry Zephyr ran to Garp and the two quarreled. Specifically, they were talking trash to each other. What do you know about teaching? Of course I know. Even your son doesn't want to learn from you. Bullshit. I'm the chief instructor. I'm better at fighting than you. Bullshit. Are you not convinced? You bastard. Then the two of them started a bare-chested fight, almost turning the entire port upside down. In the end, the noise was so loud that General Zongguo and staff officer he came after hearing the news and pulled the two men apart with bruised faces and noses. As for the final result of the discussion, Darren accepted the guidance of both Zephyr and Garp to practice. In the morning, he practiced with Garp, and in the afternoon, he followed Zephyr's method. Of course, the two of them also argued for a long time about the choice of the morning or afternoon time period. After all, if the morning time period is used for practice, the spirit and state will naturally be better, and the effect of training will naturally be more obvious. After Zephyr hummed a few words, he looked at Darren. Darren, tell me the truth. Can your body handle the high frequency and high intensity of training recently? Darren pondered for a moment and said slowly. I don't think there is any big problem. Zephyr unfolded his observation hockey and sensed Darren's breath. After confirming that it was correct, he nodded and said, well, that's good. If you feel any discomfort, you should take the initiative to bring it up, and don't leave any harm to your body. At this point, Zephyr pursed his lips and suddenly added. Also, pay attention to. That thing should be moderate. That thing. Darren was stunned, and then he understood what Zephyr meant, and the corners of his mouth twitched. Ahem. Today's training is arranged to be relatively relaxed, so I'll give you half a day off. Zephyr changed the subject and got to the point. Your progress is much faster than others in the training camp, and with your current strength and experience, it's no longer meaningful to use the regular training in the training camp. Instead of blindly stacking the amount of training, it's better to focus on your weaknesses and make up for your shortcomings. Tell me, Darren, what problems do you have in your practice, or what do you want to learn? Darren pondered for a moment, raised his head, and said solemnly. Teacher Zephyr, I want to learn observation hockey. Well, observation hockey is indeed very practical. Wait, you haven't awakened observation hockey yet. Zephyr said subconsciously, but he quickly reacted and stared at Darren with a look of surprise. Yes. Darren smiled bitterly. He remembered the embarrassing experience caused by not having observation hockey before, and his eyes twitched. But this is not right. If you don't awaken the observation hockey, you can't fight with strong men like Bondi Waldo and Kaido. You can't see their movements clearly. Zephyr frowned and murmured. Because of this. Darren raised his hand, and arcs of electricity jumped on his fingertips. Teacher Zephyr, my devil fruit is the magnetic fruit, which can release a magnetic field of a certain intensity and sense the magnetic field intensity of organisms within the magnetic field range. The effect is similar to the observation hockey, but it is not as obvious as the observation hockey in actual combat applications. He paused and added. And even if I can't dodge, I won't die if I get hit by them several times head-on. Zephyr. Okay, that makes sense. I'm grateful for everything. Chapter 183. You should have difficulty even standing up. Looking at Darren in front of him with a, dead pig is not afraid of boiling water, look, Zephyr's mouth twitched. He usually comes into contact with too many normal people, and sometimes he really forgets the exaggerated physical defense of this brat. However, Zephyr soon thought of another question. But this is not right. With your strength, you should have awakened your observation hockey naturally. He stroked the slightly stubble on his chin, and a hint of doubt flashed in his eyes. Darren also shrugged helplessly. The awakening of observation hockey is different from armed hockey to some extent. It is a kind of listening ability. It can give the user the power to feel the sound of the other party. Once this power is improved, it can read the position and number of enemies outside the line of sight, as well as the actions that the other party will take in the next moment. Observation hockey has many functions: sensing attacks, predicting the opponent's next move, sensing the strength of creatures, sensing the emotions and thoughts of creatures, sensing the position and number of objects outside the field of vision. These are the basic abilities of observation hockey, and the range and strength vary from person to person. In addition, some guys who are different from ordinary people are born with awakened observation hockey. And some special ones even master some incredible abilities based on the general observation hockey. For example, as far as Darren knows, Princess Otahime of Ryugu Castle on Fishman Island in the original plot can influence the target's thinking and emotions to a certain extent through the ability of observation hockey. Another example is the legendary pirate, Lone Red, Bararick Redfield, who can keep pace with Roger and Whitebeard. Alone, can read the target's thoughts and even memories with his special observation hockey. Because the effect of observation hockey is so powerful, Darren has always been eager to awaken this ability. Biomagnetic field perception may be able to replace observation hockey to a certain extent, but it can never be compared with real observation hockey. Not to mention that observation hockey has been cultivated to the extreme and can reach the level of foreseeing the short future. Teacher Zephyr, I'm not sure either. It's not that I didn't try to practice it, but it didn't work in the end. Darren pondered and tried to describe his feelings in words. If armament hockey is awakened naturally for me, it feels like it's a natural process without any obstacles, but observation hockey gives me a completely different feeling. That feeling is like looking up at the sky, but the sky is blocked by a huge curtain, blurry, and no light can be seen at all. Well, it's like a blind man. Zephyr suddenly took over Darren's words. Darren was stunned, and his eyes couldn't help but light up. He nodded heavily, a little excited. Teacher Zephyr knows about this situation. Zephyr smiled proudly. I have been teaching in the training camp for so many years, and I don't know how many excellent students I have taught. Although your situation is rare, it is not uncommon. Listening to Zephyr's confident tone, Darren couldn't help but smile and praise. Teacher Zephyr is really worthy of being the chief instructor of our Navy. His vision and knowledge are unmatched by ordinary people. This flattery was well done, and Zephyr felt that the pores all over his body were open with comfort, and he smiled with his hands on his hips. Now you know how powerful I am, right? If you go to Garp, that bastard will probably just tell you, you deserve a beating, to evade you. What do you think, Teacher Zephyr? Darren said hurriedly. To be honest, he was a little impatient, looking at Zephyr expectantly. Not to mention the help in combat, the most important thing is that he never wants to encounter the embarrassing things before again. In your opinion, what is the real reason why I have not been able to make up my mind to observe hockey? Facing Darren's expectant eyes, Zephyr smiled. Proudly said, you really deserve a beating. Darren. Are you happy to tease me? You old man. Ha 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 ha. Zephyr raised his hand and patted Darren, who was speechless, and laughed. The essence of things is similar. Although Garp is heartless and his teaching method is crude, his vision and experience are there, and there will always be no problem with overall judgment. His deep eyes flashed with light. Darren, the reason why you haven't awakened your observation hockey is very simple. It's just that you, as the person involved, didn't find it in time. To some extent, the awakening of observation hockey is similar to conqueror hockey. They are all stress responses that naturally derive from the body after the emotions are intensely stimulated. Zephyr, who entered the teaching state, talked freely. I have to admit that he is indeed a very good teacher. His explanations are simple and patient. When a crisis comes, many people have a high probability of awakening their observation hockey as long as they are well trained. But it is precisely because you have trained your own physique too much that you have lost your sensitivity to crises to some extent. In addition, the ability of your own devil fruit can more or less replace observation hockey. This has led to your delay in awakening observation hockey. Use it or lose it. This is not only the law of nature, but also the law of us humans. Do you understand now? Darren was thoughtful after hearing this. I see. He frowned and asked, then, Mr. Zephyr, how can I solve this problem? Zephyr smiled, wait for me here for a while. He then used the shaving skill and disappeared from the spot. In less than 10 seconds, Zephyr appeared in front of Darren again. He was twisting a pair of blue-black shackles in his hands. Darren blinked. These are seastone shackles. The seastone component can suppress or even deprive the ability user of the devil fruit ability, so that you can't use the ability to sense breath. Zephyr said with a confident smile. With this thing, it can suppress your ability and physical strength, making you weak, and then exert external pressure under such circumstances. In this way, when you can't use the magnetic field perception ability, you are forced to develop the hidden power in your body, and your probability of awakening the observation hockey will naturally increase greatly. But Zephyr teacher, these seastone shackles, actually. Darren wanted to say something, but Zephyr waved his hand to interrupt him. Okay, don't talk so much nonsense, put on the shackles quickly. Okay. Darren took the seastone shackles and put them on himself. Well, now you should have difficulty even standing up, ha 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 ha. Come on, give me a punch, let me feel your current state. Zephyr said with a carefree smile. Zephyr teacher, are you sure? Darren hesitated again. Why are you so fussy? Zephyr scolded angrily. Hurry up and hit me, Bang. The heavy fist hit Zephyr's abdomen like a sledgehammer. His expression froze there instantly. I'm grateful for everything. Chapter 184 Beat to Death. The school field suddenly became extremely quiet. There was only the sound of wind blowing and yellow sand flying. Darren's fist was still against Zepha's abdomen, the latter's body was stiff there, the corners of his eyes kept shaking slightly, and the two remained motionless. "That, Teacher Zepha, are you okay?" Darren blinked, looking at Zepha with an innocent face, his expression frozen, and slowly put away his fists. The seastone shackles on his hands made a crisp sound. Zephyr's expression changed constantly, as if he was trying to suppress something, and there were faint bloodshot around his pupils. He suddenly took a deep breath, looked at the Commodore in front of him with resentment, and said in a faint tone, "Seastone is useless to you." Darren scratched his head and said in a confused look, "When I was captured by Kaido, his subordinate, Plague, Quinn used seastone shackles to restrict my movements. At that time, I took the opportunity to do some seastone resistance training. Although I can't use the power of the devil fruit, normal activities are still no problem, and I can maintain a certain combat effectiveness." After saying that, he shook the shackles on his hands and said with some regret, "But then again, the purity of our Navy's seastone shackles seems to be a little lacking." Zeph. His chest kept rising and falling, his fists clenched and unclenched, unclenched and clenched again. He cursed wildly in his heart. The purity of the headquarters, seastone shackles is low, isn't that normal? The Navy doesn't rely on this stuff to arrest pirates. There are high-purity seastone shackles, but most of the distribution is in impel down. Zeph stared at Darren and said expressionlessly, "Why didn't you say it in advance?" Darren spread his hands innocently and said, "I just wanted to say this, but you kept interrupting me and asked me to punch you. Isn't there anything I can do? Although I have never heard of such a strange request, it is your order after all, and as a Marine, my duty is to obey orders." Here, he straightened his chest and looked righteous. "In addition, I thought that with Zepha's strength, even if I didn't wear seastone shackles, I probably couldn't hurt you, so I just went straight to the point." Zeph. He pursed his lips, his voice was a little hoarse, and he muffled a sentence. "Well, you did a good job. It was my carelessness. I didn't expect you to have done confrontational training with seastone. This is very good." Darren nodded and asked again. "Then Zepha, what do you think of the power of my punch?" "Although I feel very weak because of the suppression of seastone, I used the punching technique taught by Vice Admiral Garp in this punch. Although it is still far from Vice Admiral Garp's requirements." Zepha. He opened his mouth and said hoarsely, "Well, it's not bad." Darren breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "Thank you, Mr. Zepha, shall we start training now?" "Well, wait for me." Zepha said expressionlessly, then turned around and walked to the edge of the training ground. He stopped there. Then he bent down, supported his knees with both hands, and did it in one go. Ah! A large pool of yellow and white sticky liquid splashed on the ground. Zepha wiped his mouth with his back to Darren, turned around again and walked over, saying calmly, "The ingredients in the training camp may not be very fresh. Darren, get ready, and start training right away," Zepha said in a hoarse voice. But somehow, Darren sensed a sense of danger in his tone, and a bad premonition surged in his heart. Zepha took out a military den mushi from his arms and said in a deep voice, "Guion, all of you come to the training ground to gather." In less than half a minute, Guion and other training camp students all came to the training ground. Looking at Darren and Zepha, he looked puzzled. "Hey, Darren, why are you wearing shackles?" Kuzan greeted Darren enthusiastically. "Is this a new type of practice?" Looking at the seastone shackles on Darren's hands, his eyes suddenly burst into a fiery light. "This is so cool." Zephyr glanced at them and said in a deep voice, "Darren has been shackled with seastone and cannot use the power of the devil fruit. His strength is extremely suppressed. Now I will give you a task. No matter what method you use, as long as you hit Darren, you can get some credits. The credits will directly affect your final graduation evaluation. If you fail to get credits, your training volume will be doubled in the next 10 days. After speaking, Zepha stood aside with his hands behind his back, gnashing his teeth and whispering, "Beat me to death. Darren. Wait, Teacher Zepha." But before he could speak, he felt a pair of hungry wolf-like eyes staring at him. A chill ran down his spine. Darren turned his head stiffly and said with a wry smile. You are all classmates, comrades. Hey, I didn't expect you to have such a day, Kaji said with a wretched look on his fingers. Kuzan's eyes were blazing with fire, and he said excitedly, great, I can finally fight you again. Darren's mouth twitched, and he subconsciously looked at Guillaume for help. Guillaume thought for a while, slowly drew out the long sword at his waist, and smiled. In fact, I have wanted to do this for a long time. Darren. He looked at Huo Shaoshan. The latter laughed honestly. I'm sorry, this is the order of Mr. Zephyr. Others also cast an apologetic look at Darren, and then they drew out their sabers with excitement and even fanaticism, and their momentum continued to rise. I don't know if it's an illusion, Darren always feels that there is an inexplicable pleasure in their eyes looking at him. They have been waiting for this opportunity for too long. Darren's strength has long been deeply rooted in people's hearts. He is like a monster, far above them. Many of them have been abused by him. Now there is a chance to exonerate Darren and beat him up. They can't resist such temptation at all. Hey, you are not serious. Damn it. Darren's mouth twitched as he looked at the people who were walking towards him with a grin, and subconsciously took a fighting stance. The next second, everyone rushed forward. In the distance of the school field, Zephyr sat under a parasol, listening to Darren's screams, and couldn't help but curl up a comfortable smile at the corner of his mouth. He lit a cigar happily, squinted his eyes and smiled and murmured. Darren boy, this is for your own good. Please thank you for everything. Chapter 185 Am I a yellow-haired man? Sunset and dusk. On the training camp ground. Darren fell to the ground with a thud, gasping for breath, his face bruised and swollen, and his body covered with all kinds of bruises and wounds. Hey, you can't blame me, Darren. This is the order of Mr. Zephyr. There are still credits. Kaji walked over triumphantly, pretending to be, I don't want to do it either, and laughed obscenely. It seemed as if there was a villain in his heart laughing wildly. It's so cool. When I met Darren before, I was always tortured to death by him with various excuses. Especially when I was in Beihai, this bastard called it special training. And now, I finally got rid of this bad breath. When I punched him in the face just now, Kaji didn't know how to describe the joy and comfort. That feeling is 10 times more enjoyable than going to Fengyu Street to find an Oran. Darren rolled his eyes in annoyance, and was too lazy to pay attention to this guy. Sorry, Darren. Huo Shaoshan also came over and scratched his head. Others also came over to express their apologies to Darren. Darren waved his hands weakly, looking like he wanted to cry but had no tears. Soon everyone dispersed. Only Darren was left on the training ground, lying there in a big letter shape without any posture. How is it, Darren? Zephyr's figure wearing sunglasses appeared in front of him, blocking the evening sunlight. I don't know if it's an illusion, Darren always feels that Zephyr's smile is a bit gloating. Are you making any progress in your practice of observation hockey? Darren curled his lips and exhaled slowly. I feel like there are some signs. Sometimes I can barely catch their movements, even in the blind spot of my vision. Zephyr smiled and nodded. Now you understand my good intentions, right? Having said that, Zephyr was still quite shocked by Darren's performance. The 1-hour gang fight was a great success for a person who was shackled with sea stone. It is said that facing the siege of so many outstanding naval officers at the same time, Darren was able to rely on his excellent physical fitness and fighting instincts to barely fight back and forth, and occasionally kicked Kaji. This exaggerated performance can no longer be described as a monster. It can only show that Darren's fighting level is far beyond his peers. However, when he thought of the opponents Darren had met before, Zephyr was soon relieved. Darren boy, in fact, the most satisfying thing about you is that you can almost always stay calm during the battle. Zephyr squatted down and said with a smile. After all, the observation hockey has a lot to do with psychology, and you need to be calm to ensure its use. In some extreme cases of emotional excitement and loss of reason, the observation hockey will fail. With your current state, I believe it won't take long for you to be able to awaken the observation hockey normally. Darren nodded thoughtfully. He had relied too much on his defense and biomagnetic field perception before, so his body subconsciously did not have the tendency to awaken the observation hockey. It doesn't matter if he can't dodge the attack, because he won't die after a few hits. The development of hockey is actually closely related to personal will. For example, Charlotte Katakuri, who developed the observation hockey to the extreme and awakened the ability to predict the future, did so because he had a strong determination to protect his family and family. He didn't allow himself to make mistakes. This idea even reached a state of obsession, so he could develop the observation hockey to the realm of predicting the future. So, Mr. Zephyr, can you help me unlock these seastone shackles? Darren asked, letting out a breath. No. Zeph smiled and shook his head, saying meaningfully. Before you successfully awaken your observation hockey, you cannot remove the seastone shackles. You must get used to losing the ability of the magnetic fruit to sense the biological magnetic field and gradually adapt to it, so that the probability of awakening your observation hockey can be increased. So you have to bear with it for a while, Darren. It just happens to be a confrontational training against seastone. Is that so? Darren looked down at the heavy seastone shackles on his wrists. Zeph patted Darren on the shoulder and smiled. Okay, go home and rest quickly. Remember to replenish your nutrition in time. There will be a lot of training like today in the future. He blinked at Darren. Darren. Although I am very grateful that you have taken great pains to teach me, why do I feel that you are taking revenge on me? Seeing Zeph's somewhat evil smile, Darren couldn't help but secretly complain in his heart. Dragging his heavy body, Darren walked towards the family compound in the dusk. The military uniform on his body had been destroyed in the previous beating, hanging on his body like a rag, with scars all over his body, plus the heavy sea-stone shackles. This world-famous, King of the North Sea, looked like a downtrodden prisoner. Crossing an alley, Darren suddenly stopped. Guillaume's tall figure appeared there, looking at him calmly. How do you feel? Guillaume asked in a low voice, turning his head away as if embarrassed. You were the one who chopped the hardest just now, Darren said unhappily. Guillaume blushed, walked forward, took out the external wound ointment, and gently applied it to Darren's wound. I'm afraid that if I hold back, someone will see something, she said in a low voice. Guillaume's slender fingers gently stroked across his chest, numb and a little itchy. Darren sighed. He understood Guillaume's concerns. Girls are thin-skinned. Add to that his reputation as a scum. If others knew that she, the flower of the Navy, had become his woman, how socially dead she would be. This was like a well-born lady falling in love with a yellow-haired guy. It didn't matter to him, a yellow-haired guy, but Guillaume was still young and naturally couldn't stand too many rumors. Thinking of this, Darren couldn't help but feel a little funny. Everyone scolds yellow-haired guys, but everyone wants to be yellow-haired. Does it hurt you? Darren didn't answer, but smiled and pointed at his face. Guillaume's face flashed with shyness, and she quickly pecked Darren's face, and then ran away with her high ponytail. A small episode, Darren felt that his mood had improved a lot. He hummed a little tune and walked towards home. When he walked into the house, Ashi had already prepared hot meals. Ashi, I'm back, Darren said with a smile. Tien Yushi, who was wearing a pink kimono, turned around and was obviously happy when she saw Darren, smiling with curved eyebrows. Husband, you are back. Her eyes fell on the sea-stone shackles and asked in confusion. Hey, this is. Darren was too lazy to explain too much and said casually. Oh, this is just a prop, don't worry. Props. Tien Yushi murmured, not knowing what she thought of, her face flushed, her fingers frantically stirred in front of her, and whispered. Husband, do you want me to tie you up? Darren. What are you thinking about? Wait, it seems that it is possible. Please help me, thank you very much. Chapter 186 New Mission. Time passed in this way. Soon, half a year passed. During this half year, Darren has been wearing seastone shackles. In the morning, he went to the abandoned port to practice boxing with Garp, and in the afternoon, he continued to develop his observation hockey under the beating of the same period in the training camp. As for the evening time, it is not Darren's turn to decide. Sometimes it is Guillaume, sometimes it is Ashy, sometimes it is Guillaume first and then Ashy. The days are quite fulfilling, but a little bit of back pain. And the unexpected surprise is that as the time of wearing seastone shackles gets longer and longer, Darren even gradually begins to get used to the existence of this thing, and even the suppression effect of seastone itself on the devil fruit ability user seems to have weakened a lot. The ability of the magnetic fruit is still in the sealed state, but the feeling of weakness has weakened a lot. Navy headquarters, abandoned port. The wreckage of warships fell on the ground in all directions, and the fist marks on them were clearly visible. Bang, 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 bang. Darren used a warship as a sandbag for training as usual, sweating profusely. Every time he punched, the seastone shackles would make a crisp collision sound. Not far away, Carp was sitting under a parasol, eating donuts leisurely, looking at Darren's sweaty back, with an appreciative smile on his lips. After wearing the seastone shackles, Darren's punching power was countless times weaker than in normal state, which also meant that it was countless times more difficult for him to smash a warship than before. But this kid gritted his teeth and persisted. At this time, a passionate voice suddenly sounded. "Hey, Mr. Garp, please teach me too." Garp was stunned, turned his head and saw a tall figure with black curly hair standing there, waving at him enthusiastically. Here it comes again. Garp was very upset. Since Kuzan knew that he was coaching Darren last month, he would come here every day and ask him to teach him with expectation. Garp thought he didn't have the time. According to the latest news, the Golden Lion guy seems to have appeared in the New World again recently, and Zhongguo is having a headache about it. As for Roger, although there is nothing special, it is said that he had a brief fight with the Lone Red, Baloric Redfield not long ago. The fight between the two tore a small island apart, causing panic in many countries. Garp originally wanted to go out to sea again in 2 days, so he simply rejected Kuzan directly. But this guy, after being rejected, didn't care at all. Instead, he became more passionate and came to the door every day. Thinking of this, Garp said unhappily, "Kuzan, if you want to learn anything, go to the instructor of the training camp." "But I have learned everything I should learn." Kuzan shouted loudly, clenched his fists and looked at Darren's back, with amazing fighting spirit in his eyes. "I can't fall behind Darren, he is my lifelong opponent." This idiot. Garp covered his forehead in pain. Okay, come here." He sighed helplessly. He didn't have a bad impression of the young man Kuzan, and the latter's talent was there, just like Sakaski and Borsellino, they were all monster level. It's just that with the bad memories of coaching his own son and Sakaski before, Garp didn't like the title of monster. In fact, with his personality, if it wasn't for repaying Darren's favor, he probably wouldn't bother to teach Darren. Kuzan was overjoyed when he heard the voice, and trotted over, looking at Garp with expectation. Garp stood up from the recliner and came to an abandoned warship. Darren, who was not far away, also stopped his training, took a short break, and looked over here with some curiosity. Just like the demonstration to Darren, Garp gave the same instructions. "Watch it, I will only teach you once." As he said, his eyes condensed, and he punched out. A dull sound came out, and the huge warship in front of him instantly exploded into fragments all over the sky. This. Kuzan's eyes were shining, and he looked at the warship that had become waste with shock on his face, and couldn't help muttering. "Too cool." Garp smiled. "Do you understand?" he said indifferently and looked at Kuzan. At this time, he gradually realized how crude his teaching method was. But he also wanted Kuzan to give up. Unexpectedly, Kuzan fell into deep thought, and grinned a few seconds later. "I think I understand." Darren. "Really understand?" Garp also said with disbelief. "Then try it." Kuzan smiled. He scratched his head and walked to a warship next to him. He imitated Garp's movements clumsily and threw a punch slowly. Bang! The warship made a dull sound, not loud, but the hull of the warship shook violently, and cracks quickly extended on its surface. I feel it should be like this, but unfortunately it failed to break the warship. Kuzan said a little embarrassedly. Garp and Darren were stunned. You really understand it? Garp woke up instantly, and grabbed Kuzan's hands with shining eyes. Kuzan nodded. Yes, yes. Garp was stunned, and then laughed with his hands on his hips. Ha 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 ha, I know it. It's not that my teaching method is wrong. It's that your talent is not enough. He pointed at Kuzan. You kid, are very good. From today on, you will practice with me. Kuzan also laughed excitedly. Darren looked at these two stubborn guys standing there with their hands on their hips and laughing, with countless black lines on his forehead. He suddenly understood something and covered his forehead with his hand. It turns out that only single-celled organisms can comprehend this serious fist. Darren, did you see that? I will catch up with you soon. Kuzan stared at Darren with burning eyes. Okay. Darren didn't want to talk anymore, so he just said it casually. It's quite lively here. At this time, a voice with a smile that deserved a beating sounded slowly. The moment the voice fell, countless golden photons gathered into a tall figure in front of everyone. Vice Admiral Garp. Borsalino smiled and greeted Garp, then looked at Darren. Brigadier General Darren, you have a mission. Before Darren could speak, Garp said unhappily. Hey, Borsalino, Darren is my student now. Borsalino raised his hands and said innocently. This is the order of General Sengoku. Garp's face froze. He was well aware of the trouble his son had brought to Sengoku. So he immediately changed his words. Okay, Darren, you go. Garp said to Darren without changing his expression. You don't have enough talent anyway, and it's a waste of time to study further. Darren. The corner of his mouth twitched, and he said to Borsalino unhappily. What's the mission target? Borsalino smiled. Golden Lion, Shiki. Ask for everything, thank you very much. Chapter 187 The Battle of Scum. Golden Lion Shiki. The legendary pirate, a peak powerhouse on par with Roger and Whitebeard, even more dangerous than the latter two in the assessment of the Navy headquarters. The moment he heard the name, Darren's eyes shone, and Garp and Kuzan beside him were also slightly stunned. Hey, Darren hasn't even graduated from the training camp yet. It's not appropriate for him to deal with Shiki, right? Garp maintained his usual style and spoke bluntly. Although Darren's strength is already very strong, he is still far behind Golden Lion Shiki. Garp, who has fought with Golden Lion many times, knows this better than anyone else. Darren also fell silent. You should know that the Golden Lion at this time was not the crippled one who was beaten away by King Luffy later, but a real existence standing at the peak of the sea's combat power. The terrifying Devil Fruit ability. The unparalleled two-sword swordsmanship. Even with his magnificent ambition of dominating the world and roaring in the sea. Darren has no doubt that this guy has definitely awakened the Conqueror's haki. It can be said bluntly that, to a certain extent, the Golden Lion at this time is even more difficult to deal with than Roger and Whitebeard, and more feared. After all, this guy was a fierce man who could break into the Navy headquarters alone, destroy half of Marineford, and was finally defeated by Garp and Sengoku. Borsalino shrugged and smiled. This is the order of Admiral Sengoku, and the commander of this mission is Admiral Sengoku himself. Hearing this, Darren's eyes flashed. So that's it, you want to take me to contain the ability of the Golden Lion's floating fruit. He understood it instantly. So he no longer hesitated and asked with a smile. Okay, when do we set off? After staying in the headquarters for more than half a year, Darren has been practicing hard, and he really wants to go out to sea. It is far from enough to simply work behind closed doors. If you want to grow into a real strong man, actual combat will always be an indispensable part. And he also wants to see with his own eyes how strong that arrogant lion is. We will set sail tomorrow, go back and prepare. Borsellino finished this sentence slowly, and his figure scattered into countless golden lights and disappeared on the spot. Well, it's a good choice to go out to sea for some experience. I have done the training that should be done. It's just a waste of time to continue training. Garp looked at Darren at this time and said thoughtfully, but Darren, don't take it lightly. Ski is a bastard who is different from the pirates you have encountered before. Roger, Whitebeard, Bondi Waldo. These great pirates who dominate this era, although they are all extremely powerful, to a certain extent, these guys are not absolutely bad guys. Bondi Waldo is determined to fight against the world government, Whitebeard only wants to protect his family, and as for Roger, that bastard wants to take risks freely. As pirates, they have naturally done more or less bad things, but that's all. But Shiki is different. At this point, Garp's eyes became slightly gloomy, flashing with solemnity and fear. Golden Lion Shiki is a pure pirate. Plunder, destruction, fraud, cunning, forbearance, greed. As long as he can achieve his goal, he will not hesitate to use it, and there is no bottom line at all. In addition to the special nature of his ability of the float fruit, every time this guy appears and moves, it will give our navy a headache. Darren nodded and smiled. Don't worry, Vice Admiral Garp, I will pay attention. Looking at Darren's calm reaction, Garp was stunned at first, thinking that the other party didn't take his instructions seriously. But he reacted immediately in the next second. Plunder, destruction, fraud, cunning, forbearance, greed, unscrupulous. Isn't this the pirate version of Darren? Or, isn't Darren the Navy version of Golden Lion? Well, I was worrying too much. Garp smiled bitterly and shook his head. With the strength of Sengoku, plus Borsellino, it is enough to contain Shiki. In addition, Darren's insidiousness and cunningness, he really doesn't have to worry about them suffering. Maybe the one who will suffer in the end will be Shiki. Thinking of this, Garp instantly understood why Sengoku took Darren with him on this mission. This is to let the scum of the Navy deal with the scum of the pirates. This is so cool. At this time, Kuzan finally couldn't hold back his excitement, and shouted while waving his fist. He stared at Darren with burning eyes. Darren, you are going to defeat the legendary pirate Shiki the Golden Lion. He turned his head and looked at Garp, his eyes expectant. Mr. Garp, I want to go too. No. *2. Darren and Garp said in unison. Kuzan. Darren didn't want Kuzan, a hot-blooded guy, to chatter in his ears all the way. Kuzan, you still lack the experience of fighting with top strong men. This mission is too dangerous for you. Garp said bluntly. When you have learned from me, you can go again. He looked at Kuzan with hope in his eyes. It was so hard to find a talent who could understand his teaching, so he couldn't let him go so easily. Hey, Darren, why are you still standing here? Hurry up and leave. Kapu turned his head and waved at Darren like chasing away flies. Darren. Hey, do you have to treat me differently? A few black lines appeared on his forehead. The next day. When the sky in the distance was white, Darren had already gotten up early. The luggage had been packed and was considerately arranged by Ashi and placed in front of the door. Looking at Ashi who was sleeping soundly, Darren couldn't help but think of the madness of saying goodbye last night and smiled. Iron blocks are still quite practical. He stretched himself refreshed, and the seastone shackles made a rattling sound. After a simple breakfast, Darren picked up his luggage and walked out of his house. Facing the rising sun, Darren walked slowly towards the naval port. The home behind him was getting farther and farther away, and the peaceful life seemed to be far away. At the naval port, a large number of naval soldiers were carrying boxes of supplies onto the warship. Zhang Guo, who was commanding his subordinates, suddenly paused, turned around, looked at Darren who came to the naval port and smiled. Are you here? Darren raised his hand and saluted. Commodore Rogers Darren of the Navy headquarters, here. Zhang Guo looked at the shackles on Darren's hands in surprise and asked. Why are you still wearing this thing? Darren smiled. I'm used to it. I'll take it off on the way. Warring States nodded. Seeing that the munitions, food and other supplies had been moved, he took Darren on board the warship. The sea breeze was cold, and the air was filled with murderous intent. Set sail. I'll thank you for everything. Chapter 188 Facing Death. The warship sailed steadily on the sea. The cold sea breeze blew the seagull flag on the mast. Darren ignored the strange looks of the surrounding Navy soldiers looking at his sea stone shackles, and stood quietly at the bow of the warship, blowing the sea breeze, closing his eyes, and enjoying the brief peace. At the same time, he carefully examined the state of his body. Physique, 85.812. Strength, 74.513. Speed, 73.001. Armament Hockey, 43.035. Overlord Hockey, 52.301. In the past 6 months of training, Darren's training focus was mainly on the development of observation hockey, and learning physical skills from GARP. Therefore, reflected in the various data of the body, the most obvious improvement is strength and armed hockey. Compared with 6 months ago, the strength increased by 3 points, and the armed hockey directly jumped from the original 38 points to 43 points, a full 5 points. As for physique and speed, they gained about 2 to 3 points due to the spillover effect of training. Darren was actually quite satisfied with this result. After all, as the base of his various data became larger and larger, each point of improvement was dozens of times more difficult than before. Let alone, as far as physique was concerned, for Darren now, conventional anti-strike training was no longer of much significance. It can be clearly foreseen that the closer the data was to the full value of 100 points, the more difficult it would be to improve. Even if there was any serious injury, the data might even decline. Darren, how has your training progressed recently? Waring States, wearing a general's cloak, walked to Darren's side and handed him a cigar. Darren took it without hesitation and smiled. Not bad. Zhongguo also lit a cigar for himself and said slowly. With your strength at this level, general training is no longer meaningful. If you want to continue to improve, you either spend a lot of time on self-discipline or even strict practice, or you can only fight in actual combat. He glanced at the seastone shackles in Darren's hands. What about the development of observation hockey? Darren smiled helplessly. I have vaguely found its threshold, but it still feels hazy, just missing the final step. Zhongguo suddenly thought of something, stared at Darren in doubt and said. You kid, don't you want to face the golden lion in the state of, suppressed by seastone, and use the pressure of death to force yourself to awaken observation hockey? Darren looked at the endless sea in front of him, and said in a low voice. This is the only way. Although the training arranged by teacher Zepha is effective, my opponents in the training camp are my colleagues and comrades in arms, and they are impossible to kill me. I have a feeling that if I keep getting stuck at this stage and can't break through and successfully awaken observation hockey, as time goes by, the probability of my successful awakening in the future will be lower and lower. Facing death is the best way. People are lazy and inertial. Once you get used to relying on physical defense and devil fruit abilities to fight, your body's desire for observation hockey will subconsciously decrease. According to the information from the training camp and the experience provided by Zepha, generally speaking, the older you are, the lower the possibility of awakening hockey. Darren is now 20 years old. Although he still looks young, he doesn't have much time left. A few seconds of silence. ... You lunatic. After a long silence, Zhongguo slowly uttered a sentence. Darren smiled disapprovingly. If you don't go a little crazy, how can you compete with those real monsters? While speaking, he remembered the scene yesterday in his mind. Just after watching it once, Kuzan basically understood Garp's boxing. As for how he understood it, Darren didn't know. Just as Garp couldn't explain his teaching clearly, Kuzan couldn't explain clearly in words how he learned it. Many things are like this. If you know it, and if you don't know it, you don't know it. All of this can only be described as talent. You know, Garp's boxing is not a common thing like the Navy 6 styles, but a real ultimate physical technique. In 1 minute, Kuzan almost caught up with the progress that Darren had barely figured out in half a year. This is the real monster. After hearing Darren's words, Sengoku was silent for a while. He didn't know what he remembered, and his eyes subconsciously glanced at the other side of the deck. On the side of the cabin, Borsellino was lying leisurely on a beach chair with a glass of watermelon juice in his hand. The corner of Sengoku's mouth twitched. That lazy look, how could he be on a mission to hunt down the legendary pirate Shiki the Golden Lion? It's no exaggeration to say that it's a paid vacation. But it was such an idle bastard that Sengoku found that he could not see his strength more and more clearly. Obviously he was his adjutant, but Sengoku was a little bit unpredictable about Borsellino's combat power level. This is quite scary. This bastard obviously does nothing all day long, and I have never seen him have any serious training. Zongguo couldn't help shaking his head and changing the subject. Darren boy, do you know why I brought you this time? Darren pondered for a moment and said slowly. My devil fruit ability is very suitable for use on large-scale battlefields. Zongguo smiled with satisfaction. Yes, although Sakazuki is more destructive than you, your ability is undoubtedly more targeted when facing the Golden Lion's flying pirate fleet. The most important thing is that I want you to see the power of the flying fleet with your own eyes. If possible, you can use it as a reference in the future to form a flying fleet belonging to our navy. Hearing this, Darren frowned. He heard another meaning from Zongguo's words, layer. General Sengoku means that the primary goal of this mission is not to kill the Golden Lion. Sengoku sighed, shook his head, and said with a serious look. Shiki is very cunning and it is not so easy to kill him. Before this, the Navy had launched a siege against him many times, but in the end he easily escaped with his own devil fruit ability. He is different from Whitebeard and Roger. He is cruel and cold by nature. He doesn't care about the lives of others. When necessary, he can even use his subordinates to block his guns. So the primary goal of our mission this time is to wipe out the living forces of the flying pirates. Ask for everything, thank you. Chapter 189 You are too late. One day later. A certain sea area in the New World. It should be almost here. According to our intelligence, the last time the Golden Lion appeared was near this sea area. On the deck of the warship, Zongguo calmly flipped through the nautical chart in his hand, while adjusting his black-framed glasses, and said slowly. Darren squinted and scanned the vast sea in front of him, frowning. Even with such a huge intelligence network of the Navy, it is as difficult as finding a needle in a haystack to find the trace of a pirate group in this vast sea. He is now gradually realizing the difficulties of the Navy's senior officials such as Zongguo. Many times it is not that the Navy is incompetent, watching the riots of the Great Pirate Era and allowing so many pirates to wreak havoc in this sea without hindrance. It is that this world is really too big, and the communication and intelligence network are relatively backward. Although the speed of warships, as the main means of transportation, is not slow, it is nothing compared to the vastness of the sea. Even if they act immediately after receiving pirate intelligence or whereabouts, it will take at least several hours or even days for the large forces to arrive at the destination. Not to mention that the climate in the New World is changing unpredictably, dangerous and treacherous, and it is impossible to predict. For various reasons, the efficiency of the Navy in hunting pirates has become extremely low. This is an objective factor, which is essentially difficult to change. This is also one of the reasons why Zongguo is so eager to form a flying fleet. The Navy is not short of combat power, but mobility. If the Navy has a flying fleet, the mobility of the troops will be increased countless times, so the efficiency of the Navy in hunting pirates will also be increased to an incredible level. It's not a good idea to search like a headless fly. General Zongguo, have you found out why the Golden Lion Shiki showed up this time? Darren frowned. Zongguo shook his head and said. I can't find out. Shiki is a secretive guy with a deep mind. He is very good at hiding his action targets. This is a headache. Darren's eyebrows were twisted tighter. Hey, something extraordinary seems to have happened over there. At this time, Borsellino's slow voice suddenly sounded. He raised his hand and pointed to a certain direction on the sea in the distance, with a teasing smile. Darren and Zongguo looked in the direction he pointed, and their faces changed slightly. In the faint sea mist, the outline of a small island was looming. A large amount of black smoke was floating above the island, which lasted for a long time. When the cold sea breeze blew, Darren and Zongguo's pupils shrank together. The smell of blood. What a strong smell of blood. Land on the island. Zongguo no longer hesitated and immediately gave the order decisively. Corpses. Broken corpses. The entire town on the island was broken limbs, low civilian buildings collapsed in a mess, and blood dyed the earth and broken walls red. Shocking sword marks crisscrossed the ground, and the cuts on the buildings were extremely smooth, which could be seen at a glance as the work of a great swordsman. Dusk was approaching, and the setting sun shone on the ruins of the town. Everything in front of me was dilapidated and desolate, and vultures were pecking at rotten corpses. The stench of rotten meat mixed with blood was extremely pungent and nauseating. The Navy who landed on the island all looked pale, and many young Navy soldiers felt their stomachs rolling and almost vomited. This bastard! Zongguo's sudden furious roar broke the dead silence. Looking at the tragic and bloody cruel scene in front of him, his eyes were filled with red bloodshot and he gritted his teeth tightly. Darren's eyes also became gloomy. There is no need to think about it. There is only one person in this sea who would do such a cruel massacre of civilians. In addition, the terrifying sword marks all over the ground still exuded a chilling and sharp aura. It seems that we are a step late. The Golden Lion has been here. Borsellino sighed helplessly. Zongguo said coldly. Look for any clues and see if there are any survivors. Although there is little hope, what should be done must be done. Following his order, the accompanying navy immediately dispersed. A few minutes later. General Zongguo, there is a survivor here. An anxious voice suddenly came from not far away. Several people from Zongguo rushed over immediately after hearing the words. Under a collapsed wall, there was a man covered in blood and pale. His lower body was pressed under the collapsed building, unable to move. How do you feel? Zongguo half squatted down and asked anxiously. While speaking, he glanced at the accompanying ship doctor, who shook his head at him. Can't save him. The man opened his eyes with difficulty and vaguely saw the military uniform on Zongguo's body. Navy, Navy. He murmured hoarsely and suddenly smiled. There was an inexplicable sadness and disappointment in this smile. You came too late. Turbid tears flowed from the corners of his eyes and slid down his stiff cheeks. I'm sorry. Zongguo was startled, his eyes dimmed, and he said in a low voice. Sorry. The man raised his head with difficulty, looked at Zongguo with empty eyes, and laughed sarcastically. Blood and tears oozed from his empty eyes, and suddenly he roared with bloodshot eyes. We turned over the gold from heaven. We worked so hard every day, begged the tax collector like a dog, and didn't even dare to see a doctor when we were sick. My wife couldn't afford to see a doctor or buy medicine because of this, and finally died in bed. Just to turn over the damn gold from heaven. But in the end, where was your navy when the pirates came? You wore brand new uniforms, rode on magnificent warships, and showed off your might everywhere. But in the end, you said, I'm sorry, to me. My father, mother, and 2 children, were all dead. Is this the legitimacy of your navy? You collect the gold from heaven, and this is how you protect us. The man's powerless and angry roar echoed in the ruins of the dead city, startling countless vultures. All the navy stood still, lowered their heads, and fell into silence. Zongguo opened his mouth, his lips trembled slightly, but he couldn't say a word. He could have explained a lot. The surrender of Tian Shangjin had nothing to do with their navy. Most of it did not fall into the hands of their navy, but fell into the hands of the celestial dragons to support their extravagant and licentious life. This sea is vast, and they have rushed here as fast as possible. The Navy's military power is limited, and the Navy headquarters is far away from the New World. There are many reasons. But for the man in front of him who has lost everything and is about to lose his life, it has no meaning. I was not feeling well yesterday, so I asked for leave. Sorry. Please everything, thank you very much. Chapter 190 Momo reappears. So, don't tell me, I'm sorry, or, I'm sorry. You Navy men keep saying what justice is. Cough cough cough. The man coughed violently, coughing out black blood, and his face gradually turned from pale to purple black. He gasped for air, and sneered with his dying breath. Justice delayed, what kind of bullshit justice is that? Warring States and other Navy men were all silent. It was unknown when the rain began to fall in the sky. The raindrops fell, washing away the bloodstains on the ruins, but they could not wash away the unspeakable emotions in everyone's hearts. You're right, the justice of our Navy is indeed bullshit. At this time, a cold voice suddenly sounded. Warring States and the others were stunned, and saw Darren slowly squatting down, looking at the man calmly. He took out a pack of cigarettes from his arms and took one out of it. Want to smoke one? The man was slightly startled and nodded with difficulty. Darren then put the cigarette in his mouth and took out a lighter to help him light it. The man took a deep puff of the cigarette, and then he seemed to be choked and coughed again. It has already happened. I know it is meaningless to say, I'm sorry, to you. Justice delayed is not justice, but unfortunately, I don't like justice very much. Darren also lit a cigarette for himself and smiled. I only believe in revenge. So, if you know something, you can tell me. Even a little clue can help us find the murderer earlier, kill him, and then for your family. He glanced at the man in front of him whose pupils had gradually lost their light and whose vitality was like a candle in the wind. And for you, revenge. The man was silent. He looked at the Commodore in front of him, and suddenly realized that the temperament of this Navy was completely different from that of others. There was a kind of fierce and unbridled arrogance in his eyes. Is he a madman? The man suddenly laughed. 3 days ago, a fleet passed through our town for supplies. It is said that the fleet found a priceless treasure and wanted to sell it to a big shot in the underground world. The Golden Lion came 2 days later. He slaughtered and tortured people on the island and interrogated about the whereabouts of the fleet. And then you see the scene now. Treasure. Hearing the man's words, everyone, including Darren, frowned and fell into deep thought. With the strength and prestige of the Golden Lion, Onehe simply didn't care about the treasures. Whether it was wealth, supplies, arms or territory. As long as he was eyeing it, there was no need to go through so much trouble, just plunder it directly. He didn't lack anything at all. Do you know what he was thinking of? Zhang asked anxiously. The man looked at him with contempt and shook his head with great difficulty. Darren said slowly at this time. If it was something that the Golden Lion was eyeing, it must be a treasure that could help him dominate the sea. Zhang nodded in agreement. Then do you know where that fleet went? He looked at the man and wanted to continue asking, but he was stunned as soon as he spoke. Quack, quack. Crows flew over his head. The cold rain hit his face, crackling on the ground, and then bounced back, splashing dirt on his military boots and trousers. The man's pupils had completely become dilated, and his body was stiff. The cigarette had gone out on his white and cracked lips. He died. The clues were broken. In the ruins of the town, all the Navy silently carried out their respective tasks. In addition to trying to find other survivors, they also wanted to find out if there were any other clues that could help them find the whereabouts of the Golden Lion or the caravan. The cold rain continued to fall. Darren was wearing a large hooded coat that covered half of his face, biting a cigarette in his mouth, and walking in a corner of the ruins. He stopped and looked at a building that was cut in half in front of him. He walked forward and reached out to touch the sword marks that almost cut the earth. Since following Garp to practice boxing, Darren has gradually realized that Garp's boxing is a powerful move that erupts after the highly condensed mind and body skills. This involves the level of will, or momentum. If Garp's boxing gave him an irresistible, violent and magnificent momentum, then the exaggerated sword marks in front of him, the remaining breath on them, gave Darren a rebellious, cruel and violent temper. It can be imagined how perverse and arrogant the character of the person who swung this sword is. Treating life as a joke, using any means to achieve the goal, and laughing at the life and death of others and even oneself. Gradually, a heroic image emerged in Darren's mind. Bulu Bulu. Bulu Bulu. Suddenly, the call of the Den Den Mushi sounded from his arms. Darren was stunned, took out the encrypted Den Den Mushi, and after seeing the signal on it, he couldn't help squinting his eyes. He glanced around and made sure that there was no one before connecting the Den Den Mushi communication. A low, sly laugh came from the Den Den Mushi. Doflamingo laughed strangely. That thing has now fallen into the hands of the Dark Emperor of the New World, Lone Shark King, Lu Field. It is said that he will hold an auction on a neutral island in the New World one day, and the highest bidder will win. Many forces have heard the news and moved, including some extraordinary guys. Darren slowly exhaled and said in a deep voice. I know. Let me guess, among these extraordinary guys, Golden Lion Shiki should also be included. Doflamingo was stunned, and then laughed. It's just the news brought by Dover. Everything makes sense now. Darren turned around, put away the Den Den Mushi, and strode towards Sengoku. General Sengoku, I know what Golden Lion is looking for. The busy Sengoku was stunned. What is it? Darren looked up and looked at the cloudy sky in the distance. The ability of World Destroyer, Bondi Valdo. Momo Fruit. As soon as these words came out, Sengoku's face suddenly changed drastically. Ask for everything, thank you. Chapter 191 Coin Island. New World. Coin Island. This island was originally a deserted island, but because of its unique geographical location, it is located at the convergence point of many trade routes in the New World. Due to the need for trade and supplies, it has gradually developed a prosperous business. Because of this island later became a territory that many forces in the underground world and pirate groups fought for. After all, the more prosperous the place, the more money, information and resources flow, in other words, huge profits. After more than 10 years of oppression, competition and war, this island has experienced countless wars and was taken into the pocket of the Dark Emperor of the underground world, Lu Field. Under the latter's strong promotion, it has developed rapidly and has now become a well-known financial port in the New World. Countless banks, big and small banks have set up branches here, and there are all kinds of news agencies, chambers of commerce, casinos, commercial facilities, and tall buildings everywhere. In terms of topography, due to the continuous reclamation and expansion of Lu Field, the King of Usury, the bird's eye view presents a vague huge coin shape. In addition, with the huge amount of financial business circulating here every day, the original name of this island has been gradually forgotten by people. Everyone habitually calls this island, Coin Island. On the deck of the warship, Darren flipped through the intelligence documents handed over by Zhang Guo, and simply learned about the information of the Golden Island on the distant sea. So, in general, this is an island that is rich. Darren made a concise summary. Zhang Guo nodded and said in a deep voice. Lone Shark King, Lu Field. This guy controls more than 50% of the loan shark business in the underground world. The banks and money houses he controls are called money boxes. There is even a saying in the New World, field shit is gold. Although it is a bit exaggerated, it is enough to illustrate this guy's resources and strength. Darren rolled his eyes and said with a smile. I am very curious, how did this rich guy survive in the New World? Zhang Guo shook his head and sighed. This guy serves not only the Chamber of Commerce, fleets and pirates. It is said that many of the member states of the world government have cooperative relations with him. After all, any force may encounter an emergency situation such as capital turnover, so no matter how chaotic the New World is, it has nothing to do with this Coin Island. This island is like a peaceful area in a storm, and it has always stood firm. Therefore, many lawless people in dark areas have gathered here. Darren suddenly realized. If there is such a relationship, then it can be understood. Otherwise, such a fertile big cake is placed in the New World, and it is difficult for those greedy guys to bear not to take a bite. As for the cooperation of the member states of the world government, although he does not know the inside story, Darren can probably guess that it is very likely related to Tianshengjian. The world government collects huge amounts of Tianshengjian from member states every year. But not every member state can pay on time. After all, climate, business, war and other reasons will lead to instability in domestic tax revenue. But the attitude of the world government towards Tianshengzhen is absolutely not allowed to be postponed. As a result, many members of the member states who were in financial difficulties could only use their fiscal revenue as collateral to borrow high-interest loans from the coin island to pay enough Tianshengzhen. Although they had to pay extra high interest, it at least gave the members of the member states room to survive. Just listening to the tone of Sengoku, Darren glanced at Sengoku obscurely. Could it be that the Navy headquarters also borrowed high-interest loans from Lu Field as a supplement to military expenses? What's that look in your eyes? Sengoku rolled his eyes unhappily. He naturally noticed Darren's strange look, and laughed and scolded. Although the Navy is short of military funds, it is not to the point of borrowing usury. Pelusolino next to him said suddenly. After all, we can't afford such high interest. Darren. Zhongguo. Ahem. Darren, are you sure the source of this information is credible? Zhongguo coughed twice and changed the subject without blushing. General Zhongguo, the information should be fine. Darren nodded. Although it is only a small-scale auction, many well-known forces in the New World have received invitations. At this point, his tone was a little cold. But this also means that we are likely to encounter many unexpected enemies in this operation. Zhongguo's face also darkened, and he was clearly aware of this problem. Since it is an auction in the underground world, and the Momo fruit is so powerful and precious, it will naturally attract countless forces to fight for it. After all, with the title of World Destroyer, Bondi Waldo, it can be said without hesitation that no matter which force gets the Momo fruit, it will add an extremely powerful fighting force. Large pirate groups, chambers of commerce, powerful countries. It can be imagined that this auction will never be so peaceful. And all this is at an extreme disadvantage for the Navy. Think about that picture for a while. In the bustling auction, many powerful pirates and dark forces are bidding enthusiastically, and then suddenly a group of Navy appears. The Navy will definitely become the target of public criticism at that time. Once the fight starts, the pirates and dark forces will definitely point their spearheads at the Navy first. Whether the Momo fruit can be obtained is one thing, but being caught by the Navy is another matter. After a moment of silence, Zhongguo slowly exhaled and said in a deep voice, "No matter what, Darren, our primary target this time is still the Golden Lion, Shiki. The Momo fruit must not fall into his hands." Darren raised his eyebrows. "So what you mean is?" Zhongguo said carefully. "If possible, try to obtain the Momo fruit in a peaceful way. After all, there is a high possibility that there will be members from the member countries of the world government at the auction. So we bid normally according to the auction process." Darren was a little surprised, then how to arrange the funds. Zhongguo glanced at him. "The headquarters is short of funds, so this task is handed over to you." He looked calm and composed. Darren. General Zhongguo, I don't think the situation will remain within the controllable range. Darren thought for a while and said again. Since the target of Golden Lion is the Momo fruit, it is naturally impossible for him to obtain it in a peaceful way with his personality. He is a real pirate, so he will naturally act in a pirate way. Zhongguo pinched his temple with a headache. He also considered this factor. Do you have any good suggestions? Darren did not answer immediately. He flipped through the intelligence documents in his hand, a sneer gradually appeared on the corner of his mouth, and suddenly asked a seemingly irrelevant question. I heard that almost the entire city of this coin island is made of various coins. Yes, after all, Lu Field is rich. Wait, what do you want to do? Zhongguo answered subconsciously, but he noticed something strange in an instant, and his face changed slightly. Darren smiled and said, Didn't you say that there will be many pirates and dark forces participating in the auction? This time, let's just catch them all in one fell swoop. Please thank you for everything. Chapter 192 The Disparity in Numbers. Coin Island. An extremely wide trading port. One after another huge ships slowly entered the port, immediately attracting the attention of countless people. Here it comes. That is, the pirate flag of the pink waving skull. The flag of the Big Mom Pirates. Quote. It was a pirate ship with a unique shape and decorated with colorful candies. I didn't expect that the Momo fruit would fall into the hands of that fat guy Lou Field. On the pirate ship flying the pink skull flag, two tall figures with strange looks stood side by side. The person who spoke was a slender, pointed-faced, heavily made-up young man with long dark blue hair with light blue spots. He wore a hat inlaid with lollipops. He held a candy cane in his hand, with a sarcastic sneer on the corner of his mouth, and licked the corner of his mouth with his long tongue. Next to him was a young man with a dull face, a pair of dead fish eyes with a cold look, wearing a blue cotton jacket. The shoulder ornaments of the clothes were shaped like two hemp, and a yellow cloak. A belt with a magic lamp logo was tied around his waist. The crowd immediately whispered and exclaimed. It's the highest cadre of the big katakana middle dot mom pirates. Charlotte Perosparrow, the eldest son of Charlotte Linlin, bounty of 210 million Baileys. Next to him is Charlotte Daifuku, the third son of Charlotte Linlin, bounty of 180 million Baileys. Quote. It seems that Big Mom is determined to get the Momo fruit this time. The dead fish-eyed young man glanced coldly at the people in the port, and no one on the shore dared to look at him. He immediately smiled with satisfaction. I heard that many forces are coming this time, Brother Perosparrow. But it doesn't matter, Mom has already said that the Momo fruit must be obtained. Such a powerful devil fruit must belong to our Big Mom pirates. Hearing her brother's words, Charlotte Perosparrow sneered. Don't take it lightly, but a few familiar guys are here too. He glanced in the other direction of the port. Charlotte Daifuku followed his gaze and her eyes suddenly became extremely gloomy. The tricky guy is here too. At the port, a rough-looking pirate ship crashed into the port like a giant whale on the sea, smashing several merchant ships next to it and causing a commotion. Some people were furious, but when they saw the flag of the pirate ship, they were as if they fell into an ice cellar and dared not say a word. That's the pirate flag of the Beast's Pirates. The Beast's Pirates are here too. What are you afraid of? Wasn't their base destroyed by the Navy? If you are not afraid of death, you can go up and try. A figure covered in murderous black slowly appeared on the bow of the Beast Pirate's ship. The huge black wings gently spread out, and a majestic pressure spread out, making everyone silent. The highest cadre of the Beast Pirates, Flame Disaster, Jin, has a bounty of 270 million Baileys. As if sensing some malicious gaze, Jin turned his head and bumped into the sight of Charlotte Perosparrow and Charlotte Daifuku. Charlotte Daifuku's eyes turned cold, and she reached out to wipe the belt without a sound. Don't worry. Charlotte Perosparrow held his hand and sneered. There is no point in going to war with that guy now. Even if we want to fight, we have to wait until the Momo fruit appears. As he spoke, he nodded gracefully to Jin. Jinhei the red mask covered his face, and no expression could be seen. He glanced at Charlotte Perosparrow, said nothing, and turned around and jumped onto the land. Tisk, what a proud guy. Charlotte Dafu cursed in dissatisfaction, but withdrew her hand that was slightly sweating. This guy's aura is getting more and more terrifying. I heard that his race is very special, and even my mother wants to recruit him. Charlotte Perosparrow looked at Jin's back as he walked away, and laughed softly. Charlotte Daifuku frowned, as if she remembered something, and asked. Brother Perosparrow, even the Beast's Pirates are here. Do you think the Whitebeard Pirates will come? Charlotte Perosparrow shook her head. No, the Whitebeard Pirates never like to join in the fun. That man is too arrogant, and he doesn't even bother to fight for the Momo fruit. Charlotte Daifuku nodded and asked again. What about the Roger Pirates? I heard that a man who claims to be the Devil's descendant boarded their ship recently. Charlotte Perosparrow shook her head again and said. The Roger Pirates are not interested in devil fruits. Let's go, the auction is probably about to start. After that, the two walked off the pirate ship. Looking at the buildings in front of her, which were almost built with various coins, a cold smile appeared on the corners of Charlotte Perosparrow's mouth. Lou Field has been living too comfortably these years. Even the Big Mom pirates and the Beasts pirates have come. This is trouble. In a tavern built on the mountain near the port of Coin Island. Wearing a large hood covering his face, Sengoku lay in front of the window, staring at the scene on the port with a serious look, and couldn't help muttering. Report to General Sengoku, the guest list has been obtained. At this time, a Navy soldier who also concealed his identity came over and said in a low voice. More than 100 pirates and dark forces in the New World have received invitations to this auction, and more than 80 of them are confirmed to attend. According to estimates, there are at least 200 pirates with bounties exceeding 50 million Baileys in the auction venue, and at least 80 with bounties exceeding 100 million Baileys. Among them are, Flame Disaster, Jin of the Beasts Pirates and Charlotte Perospero and Charlotte Daifuku of the Big Katakana Middle Mom Pirates. Hearing the report from his subordinates, Sengoku's heart sank even more. Everyone is gathered together. Darren boy, are you sure your plan is okay? He couldn't help but look at Darren who was sitting behind him and smoking and drinking leisurely. Darren smiled, poured a glass of wine for Borsellino in front of him, and then said calmly. General Sengoku, rest assured. If it was somewhere else, I wouldn't guarantee it. A strange cold light flashed in his eyes. But if it was here. Darren picked up the wine glass, took a sip, and half squinted his eyes. The countless buildings made of various metal coins outside the window were reflected on the rippling glass. But it's my home court. Sengoku slowly exhaled a turbid breath. He looked at Darren and Borsellino who were sitting there drinking and smoking, and always felt that something was wrong. These two guys are too calm. The corner of his mouth twitched. However, no trace of the Roger pirates and the Whitebeard pirates was found for the time being, which was barely good news. It was definitely too late to wait for support. Even at the fastest speed of the warship, it would take at least 3 days to reach the Coin Island from Marineford. And the auction is about to begin. This also means that the only troops they can rely on their navy side are the 3 of them and dozens of elite soldiers. And what they have to face are dozens of pirate groups, nearly 100 pirates with bounties of over 100 million. And countless members of the dark forces. The number of enemies in us is extremely disparate. Please give everything, thank you very much. Chapter 193 Undercurrent. At the same time. On the top floor of a bank building in the eastern district of Coin Island. I didn't expect so many people to come and join in the fun. A young man with a golden pineapple hairstyle sat on the edge of the roof, his feet in sandals swaying casually in the air. With a straw in his mouth, Marco looked at the pirates who kept jumping off the pirate ship in the distant port and walked towards the auction in the central building of Coin Island, and his eyebrows gradually tightened. As one of the dominant forces in the New World, the Whitebeard pirates naturally received an invitation to the Momo fruit auction. Originally, they were not very interested in the Momo fruit. Although this devil fruit is powerful, not everyone can control it. The multiplication ability of the Momo fruit itself, like any other type of devil fruit, requires physical strength. And if the degree of multiplication is very large, such as a 50-fold or 100-fold increase, it will also cause an extremely heavy burden on the devil fruit ability user himself. At least among the original Whitebeard pirates' main ship officers, who has not yet been able to control the Momo fruit. So when Daddy and the others received the invitation to this auction, they all disapproved and sneered. But Marco, as the vice captain of the Whitebeard pirates, has his own ideas. Kazuki Odin. As a new partner on the ship, and now even Daddy's sworn brother, Odin's own strength is already extraordinary and can be called a monster. But because of the battle with the Navy named Rogers Darren, this guy who has always been optimistic has been depressed day by day, and even often drinks to relieve his sorrow. After thinking about it, Marco suddenly felt that this auction should be a good opportunity. If he could grab the Momo fruit and give it to Odin as a gift, it would definitely cheer him up and regroup. At least it is certain that with Kazuki Odin's powerful strength, it is more than enough to control this devil fruit that is said to be able to destroy the world. This was also his goal of sneaking into the Coin Island alone this time. Big Katakana Middle Mom Pirates. It seems that many great guys have come. Even King is here. It will probably not be so easy to get the Momo fruit this time. Marco slowly retracted his gaze and scratched his head with some headache. When he thought of the possibility of a conflict with King, he couldn't help but feel apprehensive. As for why not use the normal auction channel to get the Momo fruit? What a joke, the Whitebeard pirates don't have the money. We can only wait for an opportunity. The two brothers of the Charlotte family are ambitious and will never let King succeed. Wait until they start fighting, maybe they can succeed in the chaos. Marco muttered. On the other side. In a hotel box in the western district of Coin Island. A burly figure with scars all over his body and muscles as knotty as rocks walked out of the bathroom slowly. The white bath towel simply wrapped his lower body, and his wet golden hair looked wild and unruly. On the clothes rack next to him, there was a set of black military uniforms, and the shiny black military boots looked heavy and solemn. He only had one arm. It seemed that his right arm was blown off by some terrible weapon, leaving only the terrible scar that healed. This time it's really lively. The blond young man squinted through the glass window and stared at the pirate ship with countless pirate flags flying in the distant port, and a crazy grin of fighting intent appeared at the corner of his mouth. Dozens of pirate groups and dark forces. There are also the big Katakana Middle.Mom pirates and the 100 Beasts pirates. When he talked about the 100 Beasts pirates, a stern murderous intent flashed in his eyes. The blond young man stretched out his remaining left hand and gently pressed it on the metal coffee table placed next to him. He didn't move at all, as if an illusory purple halo passed over the surface of the coffee table. The metal coffee table suddenly melted, spreading upward along his left hand, climbing across his chest, and finally gathered into a metal arm with distinct scales on his right shoulder. Crack! The blond young man clenched his right fist, moved his metal arm, and showed a satisfied smile on his face. Douglas Barrett. It's so boring to stay on the ship all day. Barrett narrowed his eyes. Since he joined Roger's pirate group, he has challenged Roger many times. Unfortunately, every time he thought that after hard training and strength improvement, he could finally defeat Roger, the latter burst out with strength that could hold him back. 10 times. 20 times. 30 times. 50 times. Gradually, Barrett finally realized how far he was from the name Goldie Roger. He seemed to be able to chase the man's back forever. He was only one step away from touching the corner of his clothes, but this step was so far away that it seemed that there was no end. The more this happened, the more Barrett admired Roger, and at the same time, he felt deeply helpless and desperate. Although it was good to have a goal to pursue, it was unbearable for anyone to always be crushed. It was too much of a blow to his self-confidence. So when he saw the invitation to the auction in the trash can on the Roger Pirate's ship, he decided to run out without hesitation. He had been suppressed for too long, and he had to kill happily. As for the bullshit Momo fruit, he didn't care at all. Of course, when Barrett ran out, the other people in the pirate group saw it but didn't stop him at all. Instead, they laughed and told him to go back quickly after he had enough fun. After all, the Roger Pirates didn't have any restrictions on the crew, and the main policy was a laissez-faire policy. Auction. I hope you guys won't bore me too much. Barrett's mouth curled up into a grim smile, his eyes flashing with tyranny. This time, I'm going to fight to my heart's content, ha 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 ha. On this day, on the famous Coin Island, in the New World, undercurrents surged everywhere. Some people stepped on this land of luxury and decadence openly, trying to show the majesty of the forces behind them. Some people quietly sneaked into the dark, ready to move, with different purposes. Countless forces poured into this magnificent city, quietly waiting for the appearance of the devil fruit that claims to be able to destroy the world. And they all unknown to them, an invisible net has been spread out like a dark invasion, silently enveloping them. A navy named Rogers Darren is coming up with a crazy idea. Kill them all. Please, thank you for everything. Chapter 194. The auction begins. In a private room of a luxury hotel. Darren leaned on the sofa, biting a lit cigar in his mouth, and was concentrating on flipping through the map in his hand. This is the map of Coin Island that he bought from an intelligence dealer at a high price. It clearly depicts the topography, building distribution, and distribution of various trading ports of Coin Island. At this time, there is less than an hour before the auction begins. Darren must confirm the intelligence in his hands before the auction begins, and then perfect his plan as much as possible. He never believes that anyone can succeed easily, unless that person is Borsellino. Reading the map, Darren marked the locations of the major pirate groups on each port, and then began to think about the deployment of troops. From the map, the Coin Island is just like its name, presenting a circular shape. The edge of the coin is surrounded by the sea. The closer it spreads to the center of the coin, the denser its commercial area will be, and the more banks, chambers of commerce and other buildings will be. The center of the coin is the main venue of the auction. Their actions this time were too hasty, and the troops were even more limited. In addition to the pirate forces that have now surfaced, their navy has to face, and they must always pay attention to the golden lions that may appear at any time. So Darren must be more cautious and try to ensure that there is no mistake. Knock knock knock. There was a knock on the door. Come in. Darren responded and flicked the ash of his cigar. Commodore Darren, this is the iced whiskey you asked for. A young Navy soldier walked in and respectfully handed Darren a glass of wine. Well, thank you for your help. Darren smiled and casually took out a stack of colorful banknotes and handed it over. No, Brigadier General Darren. The young soldier waved his hands nervously and hurriedly, his face flushed. Take it. Darren took a sip of the wine glass, his eyes still on the map. I don't have the habit of asking people to work for me for free. No, it's my honor to work for Lord Darren. The young Navy soldier said excitedly. Darren put down the work in his hands and looked up at him. The Navy soldier wore a military cap and looked a little tired. His slightly messy black hair stuck out from under the military cap, but the look he gave him exuded admiration and worship. Although his face was young and tender, there was a different kind of determination between his eyebrows. Darren smiled, but he didn't force it. Okay. The Navy soldier scratched his head and said. I don't want to reject Commodore Darren's kindness. I'm too excited. Commodore Darren, I heard your name a long time ago. You brought peace to the chaotic North Sea, and even killed a big pirate like Bondi Waldo. As if he was too excited, he stuttered. You are the idol I have always wanted to follow. Looking at the young man in front of him who looked like a successful star chaser, Darren couldn't help laughing. What's your name? The young Navy shuddered, straightened his chest, raised his hand to salute in a standard military salute, and shouted loudly. Lieutenant Arthur of the Navy Headquarters, meet Commodore Darren. My goal in joining the Navy is to protect the peace of a sea area, promote justice, and change the world like Commodore Darren. The voice was loud and clear, revealing the spirit and passion that young people should have. Arthur. Darren whispered softly. I don't know if it's an illusion, but the temperament of the black-haired Navy soldier in front of me is somewhat similar to that of Dorag before defection. That unprecedentedly strong sense of justice, and the slightly immature look between the eyebrows, are very similar. It's not easy to change this world. Darren suddenly smiled and said. Arthur, do you want to be my subordinate? Arthur was stunned when he heard the words, and then nodded heavily in ecstasy. Can I? Darren smiled. Of course. For this kind of thing, I can just say one word to General Zongguo. Perhaps out of nostalgia for his friend, Darren made such a suggestion. That's really great. Arthur was so excited that his hands trembled, and he bowed. Thank you, Commodore Darren. I will never let you down. Darren chuckled. Work hard. This kind of thing is just a piece of cake for him, but it means a lot to Arthur. Why not? The noisy shouting was extremely noisy. The auction venue was packed with people. The entire venue was like an arena, with a circular platform covered with a red carpet in the center and countless seats surrounding the platform. In the audience above the seats, there are luxurious boxes for VIPs. Each box is surrounded by a giant glass screen that blocks the view to ensure the privacy of the VIPs and avoid being peeked by other people. Darren, how did you get the VIP box? In the 3A VIP box, Zhongguo looked down at the auction table and the crowded auditorium through the huge floor-to-ceiling glass, and exclaimed. This box is decorated in a high-end style, with all kinds of refreshments and fruits, and even the top-quality cigarettes and fine wines. Even the waiter who just came in made a subtle statement that if the distinguished guests wanted other entertainment projects, they could provide them for free. Zhongguo smoked a cigar worth more than 300,000 Baileys and drank a bottle of red wine worth nearly his annual salary. He felt that he had lived in vain for the past half of his life. He had fought all his life, but he had never enjoyed such treatment. 300 million Baileys, VIP treatment. Darren replied indifferently. Puff. Zhongguo spurted out a mouthful of red wine. He looked at the red wine spilled on the ground with some heartache, and stared at Darren who was crossing his legs with disbelief. 300 million. This can build 3 warships. Darren looked at Zhongguo's stunned look and couldn't help laughing. General Zhongguo, this mission cannot be missed. Our identities are special and cannot be exposed casually. This money must be spent. Zhongguo's mouth twitched. Darren was right. As a navy, they could not expose their identities, otherwise they would definitely cause great commotion in the auction venue. If something happened and the auction was terminated, they would not even be able to see the Momo fruit. But 300 million Baileys is too much. Zhongguo paused, and suddenly his eyes became fierce, staring closely at the precious fruits, cigarettes and alcohol from all over the world on the table. Since the money has been paid, we can't suffer a loss. Just as Zhongguo was busy dealing with the table full of cigarettes, alcohol and fruits, a middle-aged man in a black tuxedo slowly stepped onto the high platform at the auction venue below. He picked up a microphone, bowed politely to the guests who couldn't hold back and were eager to move, and said with a smile. I am very grateful to the guests from all over the world for coming to participate in this auction held by Lord Liu Field. On behalf of Lord Field, I would like to welcome you all. As soon as the voice fell, someone below shouted noisily. Stop talking nonsense, start the auction quickly. That's right. My time is very precious. The auctioneer in a tuxedo smiled politely. It seems that everyone can't wait, so I won't say any nonsense, and start our auction now. Next, it's the first auction item of this auction. He raised his hand, and several security guards in black suits carried a box onto the platform. Deng-a-deng-a-deng. Countless spotlights shone down, and the box opened immediately. The auctioneer's highly inflammatory voice rang out in the huge auction venue. The first item of this auction is a famous sword made by a famous craftsman from Nane. A good and fast sword of 50 crafts, Karuhi. I ask for everything, and I am grateful. Chapter 195 worth it. One of the best and fast swords of 50 crafts, Karuhi. The appearance of the first auction item immediately set off the whole venue. As the dazzling light of the spotlights hit the knife in the long glass box, everyone's eyes burst out with greedy light, ready to move. Many of the sword practitioners had extremely fiery eyes, and even wanted to rush onto the stage and take the knife away directly. Under the spotlight, the famous sword named Kuhi flashed with a faint edge, and the blade showed a silver-white luster. The auctioneer in a black tuxedo seemed very satisfied with the reactions of the guests present, and his passionate voice spread out through the microphone. This, hunting sea, is a famous weapon made by a master craftsman from the South China Sea over a period of 10 years. It once exerted the fierce power of splitting the sea with one sword, in the hands of a swordsman. It was named hunting sea because of its reputation of hunting the sea. The blade of this knife is at least 30% heavier than that of an ordinary good and fast sword, so it can significantly enhance the force of the cut. As for the precious value of hunting sea itself, which ranks among the 50 good and fast swords, I believe there is no need for me to say more. Then let's not talk nonsense. The starting price of this auction item is. The auctioneer raised his hands dramatically, his movements a little exaggerated. 100 million Baileys. As soon as the words fell, a pirate with a long sword on his waist, who looked like a samurai ronin, stood up suddenly and bid with burning eyes. I bid 120 million Baileys. Ha 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 ha. Kenshin the Beheader, this sword is not yours. A deep and sinister laugh came from another direction. It was a bald man carrying a huge axe, as big as a giant bear, exuding a fierce aura. I'll pay 130 million Baileys. He stared at the man dressed as a ronin with malicious eyes, looking tit for tat. Manchong, what do you want to do? You're not a swordsman. The ronin named Kenshin gritted his teeth. Manchong sneered. So, I have many swordsmen under my command. Seeing this scene, the others knew at a glance that these two guys probably had some grudge. The bidding below continued. In the luxury box on the top floor, Zhongguo bit 2 lit cigars in his mouth, and the smoke filled the whole room with thick smoke. It's really a very good famous sword. He glanced at the good and fast sword, Kai Hai, and sighed. A good and fast sword of 50 gong can be called a famous sword in this sea. After all, the 12 great swords of supreme sharpness, and 21 great swords of supreme sharpness, above this level are too rare, and most of them have fallen into the hands of the strong. For example, the birthday gift that I found for Guillaume at the beginning, the golden Chinchou thin sword, is listed in the ranks of 21 great swords of supreme sharpness. But even if it is in the ranks of great swords, it took a lot of time and connections for the powerful admiral of the navy, Sengoku, to succeed. This shows how precious and rare the famous swords are in this sea. And now the first auction item of the auction of Lu Field, the Lone Shark King, is actually a good sharp sword of 50 gongs. As we all know, in auctions like this, generally speaking, the auction items placed in the front are relatively lower in value. The later the auction is, the more the finale, the higher the auction item, the more valuable it is. This is common sense. This made Zhongguo sigh that the resources controlled by the underground world are indeed incomparably huge. But I always feel that the bid is a bit high. Even for a good sword, the price is generally around 100 million Baileys at most. Zhongguo couldn't help shaking his head when he heard that the bids below had reached 150 million Baileys. Especially the competition between the Ronin and the giant bear man has gone beyond the scope of bidding, and has derived new and old hatreds, which obviously aroused anger. Pirates are really a group of impulsive and stupid guys. Zhongguo shook his head in disapproval. I'll bid 200 million Baileys. A calm voice suddenly sounded. Zhongguo. He turned his head with a confused face and looked at Darren, who bid leisurely, his eyes widened. The VIP in the 3A box bid 200 million Baileys. When the auctioneer heard the bid, he was shocked and laughed loudly. This guest is really worthy of being our distinguished guest. He is so generous. The noisy auction venue suddenly became quiet. The guests in the auction venue were stunned on the spot, their faces full of disbelief. Especially the two people who were fighting, Manchong and Jian Xin, immediately lost their temper and stood there blankly, looking confused. No, is there anyone who bids like you? They couldn't help but look up at the 3A luxury box, and couldn't help but be curious about this person's identity. Everyone is bidding millions or tens of millions. How come you directly add 50 million Baileys? It seems that you are very powerful. In the luxury box. You are crazy, brat. That's just a good sharp sword. Not a big sharp sword of 20 kung fu. Zhongguo grabbed Darren's collar, looking extremely crazy. 200 million Baileys. Why don't you use the 200 million Baileys for something else? This sword is not worth 200 million Baileys at all. However, facing Zhongguo's madness, Darren said calmly. It's just 200 million Baileys, I think it's reasonable. Zhongguo was struck by lightning. 200 million Baileys. Just. His mind was running fast at this moment, frantically calculating what 200 million Baileys could do. Build 2 warships, or equip 200 elite Navy weapons, or even the military pay of 2,000 Navy soldiers. But you obviously don't know swordsmanship. Zhongguo almost bit his teeth to pieces. Darren smiled and said. Collecting famous swords is my hobby. A sharp edge flashed in his eyes. This, hunting sea, has the attribute of heavy, which can increase the strength of the slash, and Darren attaches great importance to this. His magnetic sword control has been developed more and more proficiently. Although the power of Yan Mo is strong, the consumption of domineering is too huge. If there is another good sword as a substitute, his tactics may be more flexible. And the most important point is that a Yan Mo is not enough to cope with the needs of a large-scale battlefield. If possible, Darren wants to collect more famous swords. The blade array, composed of multiple, even dozens or hundreds of famous swords, turned into a rain of swords, which is definitely an extremely terrifying weapon on a large-scale battlefield. Even if it is not entangled with domineering aura, with the sharpness and cutting properties of the famous sword itself, under the impetus of the magnetic field, the power is unknown how many times stronger than ordinary artillery. As for the price, what a joke! Darren, who obtained the treasure of the Sky Island Golden Town, is now so poor that he only has money left. He can't spend it all. Not to mention, collecting famous swords is a great pleasure in itself. This is different from the items. The value of the weapon itself has nothing to do with it. There are only 50 limited edition weapons in the world, so no amount of money is too much. And compared to the wealth I have, 200 million Baileys is just a drop in the bucket. It's worth it. I'm grateful for everything. Chapter 196 Strange Auction Items. The guest in the 3A VIP box bid 200 million Baileys. Is there a higher bid than 200 million Baileys? The auctioneer said excitedly to the microphone, waving his hands. There are only 50 famous swords in the world. But for only 200 million Baileys, you can get a powerful weapon, and a comrade in arms and partner who grows up with the swordsman. Is there anyone else bidding? His voice is very inspiring and professional. It's a pity that in the face of this shockingly high price, the people who were originally excited all died down. 200 million Baileys, even in the New World, is a huge fortune. The Ronin named Kenshin frowned, but finally sat down helplessly. This price was beyond his budget. Manchong also snorted coldly and stopped talking. At the same time, in the luxury box with the 2A label. Brother Perospero, do we want to quote? Charlotte Daifuku stared at the hunting sea eagerly and said. Charlotte Perospero shook her head and sneered. Our funds are limited this time. The expansion of Totland requires a lot of budget. Let's give up and focus on the Momo fruit. And he paused, licked the corner of his mouth with his long scarlet tongue, and glanced coldly in the direction of the 3A box. The glass curtain wall blocked his sight, making it impossible for him to determine the identity of the people in the box. It's not certain who will get this knife in the end. Charlotte Daifuku heard this and immediately understood, and also laughed sinisterly. In the 1A luxury box, Jin stood in front of the huge floor-to-ceiling glass with an indifferent look, and there was no ripple under the mask. At this time, the auctioneer also began to count down. 200 million Baileys, once. 200 million Baileys, twice. 200 million Baileys, 3 times, deal. He smiled and bowed slightly in the direction of the 3A box. Congratulations to this guest for successfully bidding on this peerless sword. Several security personnel in black suits quickly came on stage, packed the hunting sea, and sent it to Darren's box. Then, next, please welcome the second auction item of this auction. The auctioneer smiled, raised his hand, and moved forward in an orderly manner. Soon another staff member presented a small wooden box. The wooden box opened. Under the spotlight, a dark brown strange fruit appeared in front of everyone. This is a devil fruit. What type of devil fruit is it? It doesn't look like a Momo fruit. That pattern, if I'm not mistaken, it should be an animal type 1. The guests in the audience whispered. The auctioneer made an exaggerated introduction gesture and explained. As you can see, this is an animal type devil fruit. Animal type bear fruit brown bear form. As long as you eat this devil fruit, you can have the exaggerated strength and physique of a brown bear. As we all know, brown bears are one of the most powerful carnivores on land in nature. The ability of this devil fruit, as long as it is properly developed, can definitely become the overlord on land, and can even compete with adult giant warriors in strength. Well, let's start now. The starting price of this brown bear fruit is 100 million Baileys. After the voice fell, many of the guests present immediately became interested. After all, they knew that the Momo fruit was not something they could get their hands on. Many of them had been aiming for other items at the auction from the beginning. Although the brown bear fruit did not have any special abilities, it was obvious that it could improve strength in a short period of time, which was something that many pirates in the New World urgently needed. Ha 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 ha. This is simply a devil fruit tailor-made for me. A domineering voice suddenly sounded. The bald man named Barbarian Bear, who had just sat down, stood up again and laughed. I'll pay 100 million Baileys. His eyes were filled with confidence that he was determined to win. He glanced at the 3A box cunningly and sneered. You idiot, you regret it now. You used 200 million Baileys to bid for that broken knife. Now let's see how you can compete with me for this devil fruit. But as soon as he finished speaking, the indifferent voice came out of the 3A box again. 200 million Baileys. Bear. In the mocking eyes of the people around him, his face full of flesh turned red. Damn it, who is this bastard? How can he be so rich? Box 1A. Master Jin, do we need to make an offer? A member of the Beast's pirates knelt on one knee. He asked respectfully to the tall black figure in front of him. This devil fruit is very suitable for our pirate group. Jin looked at the 3A box calmly, and suddenly shook his head and said. That's not necessary. The members of the Beast pirates were stunned, and then they seemed to understand something and bowed their heads deeply. Darren, are you crazy? That's just an ordinary animal type. Zhang covered his heart painfully. Watching Darren hand over a check to the waiter casually, and the long string of 0 on the check, it was more painful than killing him. Darren smiled and said. It's okay, it's only 200 million Baileys, it's worth it. Zhang Guo. At this time, a new round of auctions had begun on the platform below. Let us congratulate the VIP in box 3A again for buying this powerful devil fruit. The next auction item is very unique. As a glass frame covered with black cloth was lifted onto the platform by the staff, the auctioneer's tone became mysterious. This auction item is not a powerful weapon, nor is it a rare devil fruit. It is not a treasure map, and it has nothing to do with treasure. In the eyes of some people, it is not even as good as a piece of waste paper, but in the eyes of experts, it is priceless and inestimable. I can assure you that even in R. Coin Island, it is extremely difficult to get this auction item. Hearing the auctioneer say this, everyone's appetite was instantly raised, and curiosity could not help but appear on their faces. Seeing the reactions of the crowd, the auctioneer smiled with satisfaction. Then, let's take a look. This auction item also has a starting price of 100 million Baileys. With a swish, he lifted the black cloth. Instantly, everyone at the auction was stunned. Zhang Guo looked puzzled. Borisolino scratched his head. Darren looked stunned. Under the black cloth, there was a glass display stand. In the glass display stand, a slightly old tight peach dress was hung. From its hot style, it can be seen that the owner of this dress has a very charming figure. The auctioneer said loudly in an excited tone. The dress that was once worn by the pirate big katakana middle dot mom Charlotte Lingling. He waved his hand. And it hasn't been washed yet. The world was suddenly silent. Suddenly. Bang. The door of box 2A was suddenly pushed open. Charlotte Perospero and Charlotte Daifuku walked out with murderous and gloomy faces. They exuded ferocious murderous intent and powerful momentum, and said grimly. Our Charlotte family offers 200 million Baileys. Whoever dares to bid is an enemy of our Charlotte family. I ask for everything, and I am grateful. Chapter 197 Finale. Momo Fruit. The whole venue was silent. Everyone was stunned by the tight skirt on the stage and the two Charlotte family cadres who walked out of the 2A box angrily. In the luxurious box. Warring States. Darren. A few black lines floated on their foreheads. It's really scary. The murderous aura of these two guys. Borsellino said with a smile. It's really a good auction item. Darren held back for a long time before he could say this. Is this the original flavor? But that's big katakana middle dot mom. A fat figure with a bloody mouth opened and eating crazily appeared in Darren's mind. Goose bumps appeared all over his skin, and he couldn't help but feel cold. Who would buy such a thing? Wait. Darren suddenly realized that something was wrong. He squinted and looked at the tight skirt in the glass window. It was convex in front and curved in the back, and there were still dried bloodstains on it. This size is not right. If it was the big katakana middle dot mom in his memory, that huge and twisted body would not be able to fit into this graceful and enchanting hip skirt. Darren suddenly remembered the timeline he was in. In the year 1493 of the Haiyuan calendar, 9 years after the end of the Battle of God Valley, there were still more than 20 years before the War on the Top. Could it be? General Sengoku, do you know what big katakana middle dot mom Charlotte Linling looks like now? Darren looked at Sengoku and asked. Sengoku was silent for 2 seconds and waved his hand. He took a stack of bounties from a Navy soldier, pulled out one of them, and slapped it on the table. That's it. Darren. Okay, now I can understand it a little. But will anyone really buy it? Besides, the 2 senior officers of the big katakana middle dot mom pirates have already threatened, and it is estimated that no one will make an offer. Who do you think I am? I offer 210 million Baileys. At this time, a pirate with a coxcomb in the venue below suddenly stood up with a grin, staring at Charlotte and Perospero in a rebellious manner. I want this skirt. A stone stirs up 1,000 waves. As soon as this person spoke, the whole venue was instantly ignited. Who are you? I offer 230 million Baileys. A fat man wearing the fat man in the Italian mafia suit blew out smoke rings. He was biting a gold-plated cigar in his mouth, and he was clearly a figure of the dark forces in the underground world. At this time, his eyes looking at the dress revealed undisguised greed and desire. Hey, I offer 240 million. Another person called out a price. This person was wearing expensive clothes, and he looked rich or noble, just like a politician or royal family of a certain country. The crowd kept making bids, mixed with heavy and excited breathing. I offer 250 million Baileys. I offer. ... Listening to the continuous bids, the faces of the Charlotte brothers gradually turned as dark as the bottom of a pot, their chests rose and fell rapidly, and their whole bodies couldn't help shaking. Big katakana middle dot mom pirates, 300 million Baileys. Charlotte Perospero made a solemn voice from her throat, gritting her teeth. If this dress is really bought by someone else, it is estimated that their pirate group will become the laughing stock of this sea. This is no longer a question of money, it is a question of face. This group of perverts. They are all a group of gentlemen. Looking at the lively and continuous bidding scene below, Darren's mouth twitched wildly. The higher the position, the more strange the fetishes, which can be seen from the group of celestial dragons. Not to mention, that is big katakana middle dot mom. A powerful pirate, a natural destroyer, and a beautiful woman with a charming figure. Hearing that the auction figure has soared to 300 million Baileys, Darren couldn't help but sigh, what a fun. 3 minutes later, this, original, tight skirt from big katakana middle dot mom Charlotte Linling was bought by the Charlotte Perospero brothers at a high price of 340 million Baileys. As the auctioneer hammered down the hammer with satisfaction, many people showed regretful expressions. Only the Charlotte brothers had extremely gloomy faces. It's really strange. They clearly got what they wanted, but they still looked like they were going to kill someone. Borisolino gave his comments at the right time. Warring States. Darren. The auction continued. The next series of auction items returned to normal. There were carefully crafted armor. There were hallucinogenic drugs. There were strong human slaves. There were also beautiful mermaids. All kinds of prohibited goods were presented in front of everyone, dazzling all the guests. And Darren also selected the auction items he was interested in and bid for them. Just like before, under the gradually numb eyes of warring states, he bid with the attitude of, I'm not short of money, directly persuading competitors to retreat. This made the guests present curious about the identity of the 3A box. The total consumption was more than 1 billion Baileys, which was not something that ordinary forces could afford. At the same time, in a corner of the venue, Marco, who covered his body tightly with a hood, was also secretly shocked. More than 1 billion Baileys. This is enough for our pirate group to spend for several years. On the other side, the brothers Charlotte Perospero and Charlotte Daifuku looked at Darren's box with hostility in their eyes. "Brother," Charlotte Daifuku said tentatively. "This guy is probably not simple." Charlotte Perospero's eyes were full of viciousness. "Even our big mom pirates only brought 500 million Baileys this time. To be able to throw out more than 1 billion Baileys without any hesitation." He exchanged glances with his brother and confirmed an idea at the same time. Once the Momo fruit appears, the guy in the 3A box must be killed first, and then turn around to deal with Jin. On the other side, Jin's eyes looking at the 3A box began to gradually permeate coldness. The closer the auction is to the end, the more tense the atmosphere on the field. The representatives of the major forces know that a brutal competition will soon take place. And the owner of the 3A box, the mysterious and powerful guy, will naturally become the target of public criticism. Even if you can't grab the Momo fruit, it's definitely worth it to grab that guy. Even that guy himself is more valuable than the Momo fruit. In an instant, countless malicious and unkind eyes were cast towards Box 3A. Let us congratulate the VIP in Box 3A for winning this auction item. Now, it's finally the finale. The auctioneer's excited voice interrupted everyone's thoughts. Tap, tap, tap. Countless spotlights were projected down, and the figure of the man in the tuxedo appeared in multiple directions on the platform. He opened his arms, as if playing the last ending, his eyes shining. The much anticipated swish. As soon as the voice fell, the ground of the platform suddenly unfolded, and a mechanism rose. The mechanism supported a transparent glass box. An evil box exuding a mysterious and strange atmosphere. The devil fruit was quietly displayed in it. Instantly, everyone held their breath. Momo fruit. I know it's short. Add more, ask for everything, thank you very much. Chapter 198 0 Yuan Auction. Momo fruit. The devil fruit ability of the legendary pirate, world destroyer, Bondi Waldo. The powerful devil fruit ability that can multiply its own speed or the size of the object it touches by dozens or even hundreds of times. Even the most ordinary artillery, under the multiplication ability of the Momo fruit, can be transformed into a terrifying weapon to destroy the town, enough to completely raze a medium-sized town to the ground in an instant. Bondi Waldo himself relied on the powerful ability of the Momo fruit to fight against the encirclement and suppression of the Navy and even the world government, and won the title of World Destroyer, which made countless people on this sea terrified. A year ago, when Bondi Waldo was defeated and died in the hands of a naval colonel in the North Sea, many people expressed disbelief, but more people were frantically searching for the Momo fruit in secret. Now, this invincible devil fruit that has been silent for more than a year has finally reappeared in the world and presented to everyone present. Seeing the devil fruit placed in the glass box under the spotlight, everyone in the auction had greedy red light in their eyes, and their breathing became rapid involuntarily. It's real. I thought it was just a gimmick made by Lou Fidel. He is worthy of being the Black Gold Emperor of the underground world. He can even get such a rare secret treasure. The next snatch will probably be very fierce. He, maybe we have a chance in the chaos. Everyone was boiling, and the desire in their hearts could not be suppressed and gushed out. Members of the pirate groups and dark forces gathered with their companions, their eyes became ferocious, and their eyes swept across the field with hostility. Although there are forces like the big katakana middle dot mom pirates and the 100 beasts pirates that are rampant in the new world among the participants in the auction this time, what does it matter? This is the underground world. The forces are complicated. Pirates and dark forces are people who live on the edge of a knife and put their heads on their belts. The so-called big names of the 100 Beasts pirates and the big katakana middle dot mom pirates can't scare them at all. As long as there is enough profit. And the Momo fruit is the biggest profit. Even if there is only a little chance, they will not give up. Everyone's eyes are emitting a wolf-like fierce light, staring at the Momo fruit on the auction table. As long as they can get the power of this devil fruit, let alone, flame disaster, Jin, one of the 3 great disasters, let alone the senior cadres of the Charlotte family. Even if Kaido and Big Katakana Middle. Mom personally come on the field, they are not afraid at all. The greater the risk, the greater the reward, this is the philosophy of being a pirate. And the most important thing is that they are not without a chance. Judging from the situation just now, let alone the Beast Pirates and the Big Katakana Middle. Mom Pirates, and the owner of the mysterious 3A box. The 3 most powerful forces in this auction will definitely take the lead. While they are fighting each other and fighting to the death, it is our best chance to snatch the Momo fruit. The pirates and dark forces present all had the same idea at this moment. It's finally here. That's the Momo fruit. Charlotte Daifuku couldn't suppress the excitement in her tone, and her heartbeat accelerated. Brother Perospero, as long as we get the Momo fruit, the strength of our Big Katakana Middle. Mom pirates will definitely be better, and even the arrogant giants will surrender to us. Charlotte Perospero laughed sinisterly. Not only the giants, but also the Whitebeard pirates who have obtained the power of the Momo fruit. Can't be the opponent of our Big Katakana Middle. Mom pirates. Then, we will be able to help Mom build a real, Totland. Build an ideal country where all races live in equality and harmony. He licked the corner of his mouth with his scarlet tongue, and held the candy cane tightly in his hands. Lord Jin, that's our goal. The pirate wearing a bull-horned helmet trembled all over and lay on the glass bed, staring at the Momo fruit with red eyes. Flame Disaster, Jin, who was dressed in black and wrapped tightly, nodded, and a cold voice filled with murderous intent came from under the mask. Are the other members ready? The pirate shuddered and saluted. Yes, Lord Jin. Everyone is in position, lurking at the exits of the auction house. This time we are equipped with the virus bomb developed by Lord Quinn. If you inhale a little bit, you will lose your combat ability or even be burned to death by the high temperature of your body. It is impossible for anyone to survive the attack of the virus bomb. We can ensure that no one can snatch the Momo fruit from our beast pirates. Jin nodded and said coldly, very good. The huge black wings slowly spread out behind him, and the strange red flames rose around the wings. 3A expensive guest box. Momo fruit. Zongguo swallowed his saliva with a gurgle, staring at the devil fruit that exuded a strange aura. At this moment, even he had to admit that he was tempted. As an old rival of Bondi Waldo, Zongguo naturally knew how powerful the power of the Momo fruit was. If they could get the Momo fruit, as long as they developed it properly, the Navy would definitely have a high-end combat force. Strategic existence. Lou Field is an honest man. He actually put the real Momo fruit on the auction table. Darren was also quite surprised at this time. In theory, a priceless secret treasure like the Momo fruit should not be publicly released at the auction. After all, the risk is too great, and there is a possibility of being directly purchased for 0 yuan. The normal situation should be that after the bid is successful, Lou Field will arrange a transaction with the bidder privately. However, considering that this is the dark world, it is standard to exchange money for goods. The title of Lone Shark King of Lou Field is nothing in the eyes of these pirates who live on the edge of a knife. And then again, there are actually quite a few such cases. In the original plot, Da Flamingo, generously, put the real gold fruit up for auction, and in the end, Tessero got a big bargain. Not to mention the flame fruit in the Duyu arena. Businessmen are honest. Darren, are you sure? Zongguo said anxiously. I guess the Big Mom pirates and the Beasts pirates will make a move later. While speaking, he glanced at the sky above the auction venue from time to time. His expression was fearful and nervous, as if he was alert to the arrival of someone. Darren smiled. Before he had time to speak, the auctioneer in a tuxedo on the auction table below had already begun to introduce with passion. I ask for everything, and I am grateful. Chapter 199 The melee begins. Momo fruit. The power of the devil fruit of the legendary pirate Bondi Waldo. As long as you obtain the power of the Momo fruit, you will be the next world destroyer that the world government fears." The auctioneer did not change his professional qualities. Both his tone and demeanor were very inspiring. A few simple words directly ignited the whole audience, making everyone's eyes glow red. "Now, let's start the auction. The starting price of this momo fruit is 500 million Baileys." As soon as the words fell, the whole audience was boiling. The bounty of Bondi Waldo, the original owner of the momo fruit, was 300 million Baileys, so everyone was not surprised by the starting price of this momo fruit. Big Katakana Middle. Mom Pirates offer 600 million berries. Charlotte Perospero was the first to bid, and she added another 100 million berries as soon as she opened her mouth, shouting out a high price of 600 million, clearly trying to scare off others. But before he finished speaking, King in Box 1A said coldly, "The Beast's Pirates, 700 million berries. This damn bastard." Charlotte Perospero cursed, glanced fiercely at the box where King was, gritted his teeth and raised the price again. Big Katakana Middle. Mom Pirates offer 800 million berries. He subconsciously clenched the candy cane in his hand and gave a look to Charlotte Daifuku next to him. 800 million berries is the entire budget of their Big Katakana Middle. Mom Pirates. If they can't bid for the momo fruit even with this, they will take action. 800 million Baileys. The Big Katakana Middle. Mom Pirates are indeed one of the largest pirate groups in the New World. They bid 800 million Baileys. The auctioneer was so excited that his face flushed. He could already imagine the high commission he would receive after the auction. Jin in the box was silent for a moment. 800 million Baileys is also the largest budget of their beast pirates. After all, they had just entered Wano country not long ago, and all the military factory production lines were being rebuilt, and the shortage of funds was extremely serious. It was extremely difficult to transfer 800 million Baileys to participate in the auction this time. But at this moment, the indifferent voice in the 3A box sounded again in the entire auction. 1 billion Baileys. Instantly, there was a dead silence. Everyone stared at the direction of the 3A box in amazement, and they couldn't believe their ears. That guy. After spending more than 1 billion Baileys before, he actually still had 1 billion in cash in hand. And from his relaxed tone, it was clear that the 1 billion Baileys bid was not all he had in his budget. Most importantly, everyone present knew that the Beast's Pirates and the Big Mom Pirates came for the momo fruit this time. And the guy in box 3A dared to bid under the pressure of the two major pirate groups. It was clear that he didn't take them seriously. Is he really not afraid of death? This is equivalent to a direct provocation to the two major pirate groups. 1 billion Baileys. This mysterious distinguished guest actually offered 1 billion Baileys. This bid, even if it was placed in at the auction on our coin island, it was the first time in history. The auctioneer began to stir up trouble appropriately. He alone overwhelmed the two major pirate groups. This is really unexpected. Then, can our Big Katakana Middle. Mom Pirates and Beasts Pirates bid higher than 1 billion Baileys? Or, even as powerful as they are, they have to succumb to the pressure of money. Let's wait and see. Boom. Two huge roars exploded from the luxury boxes 1A and 2A at the same time. The floor-to-ceiling glass curtain walls of the two boxes were shattered at the same time, and three murderous figures rushed out of them in anger, rushing towards the 3A box at the same time. Finally, they took action. The guests present were shocked and moved silently, each drawing their weapons and preparing to act according to the situation. You were looking for death. Charlotte Dafu, who was closer, rushed to the front, her lifeless eyes flashing with fierce light. The palm rubbed the golden belt, and in a blink of an eye, a large amount of blue smoke came out of the belt, quickly gathering into a huge blue lamp man. Steaming fruit. It can summon a powerful lamp man to fight with infinite power. You are a guy who doesn't know the height of the sky and the earth. Do you think you can do whatever you want with a little money? Charlotte Daifuku took a step forward, and the blue lamp demon in the sky raised a huge sword and slashed down heavily towards the 3A box. Demon slash. Swish. The explosive slash directly tore the luxury box into pieces, the walls and glass continued to shatter, and smoke filled the sky. Several tall figures were looming in the smoke and dust, and could not be seen clearly. Charlotte Daifuku immediately laughed grimly and commanded the lamp demon to slash at the three figures and attack them. This is a new world. Only with strong enough strength can you. No, Daifuku, retreat quickly. At this time, Charlotte Perospero behind him seemed to have noticed something, his face suddenly changed, and he exclaimed to interrupt Daifuku's words. Charlotte Dafu was stunned. Before he could react, a dazzling golden light suddenly shone in front of his eyes, instantly depriving him of all vision, stinging his eyes and causing them to ache and burn, and tears welled up. Charlotte Dafu subconsciously closed her eyes. Have you been kicked by the speed of light? A slow and leisurely voice suddenly sounded beside him, revealing a playful tone. Instantly, Charlotte Dafu felt as if she had fallen into an ice cellar, and felt a bone-chilling chill on her spine. The next moment, a white leather shoe wrapped in golden light, with an indescribable high speed, dragged out a golden light mark, and poked out from the rolling dust, and shot out a shot. Kick at the speed of light. Bang! Under the shocked and frozen eyes of countless guests. The kick wrapped in a beam of light directly shot through the huge blue lamp demon, and then heavily shot at Charlotte Dafu's face. He fell directly from the sky at a speed several times faster than rushing up. Falling, sinking deeply into the earth. The earth rumbled, as if a meteorite fell to the ground, cracking continuously, spreading countless cracks, and the gravel and dust kept jumping. Everyone subconsciously lay on the ground to avoid, raised their arms to block the oncoming air waves, and looked horrified. A drop of cold sweat oozed out of Charlotte Perospero's forehead. Under the mask of Jin, the pupils of his eyes instantly shrank into fine needles. The strong wind blew away the dust. In the dilapidated box like a ruin, three tall and extraordinary figures with majestic momentum gradually emerged. The snow-white wide cloak danced wildly in the wind behind them, and the sense of oppression came over them. See. It's the Navy. After the entire auction venue was dead silent for a moment, someone finally cried out in shock. I'll be grateful for everything. Chapter 200, Snatch. Momo Fruit. Navy. Damn it, how could the Navy appear here? What on earth is that fat bastard Lufield doing for a living? This is an auction in the underground world. The crowd suddenly became chaotic, and everyone stared at the three figures in white cloaks in astonishment, and a sense of panic surged in their hearts. How could the Navy appear here? Is this a trap set by them? Or have the Navy's warships surrounded the island? Countless thoughts surged in the minds of the pirates, making them restless. The timid or cautious ones kept retreating in the crowd, ready to run away at any time. After all, in the impression of the world, the actions of the Navy have always been crushing with a strong number of people and sophisticated equipment. Generally speaking, once you see a Navy on an island, it largely means that the Navy's main force has arrived. The smoke and dust drifted away. At this time, the three oppressive figures standing on the ruins finally appeared clearly in front of everyone. The figure on the left was wearing a yellow and white suit, a navy cape on his shoulders, and exaggerated frog sunglasses. He rubbed his chin with a teasing look, and was slowly retracting his feet raised in the air. The figure on the right has a black afro, black framed glasses, a solemn look, and a deep aura. The wheat-ear cloak that represents the rank of Admiral of the Navy looks majestic. The Navy in the middle is far more dazzling than the first two. The arrogant eyes, handsome and cold features, short black hair fluttering in the wind, hands wearing a pair of blue-black seastone shackles, wild and unruly temperament. When the pirates saw the appearance of these three people, they all gasped and their faces changed drastically. Admiral of the Navy Headquarters. Buddha Sengoku. Rear Admiral of the Navy Headquarters. The existence known as a monster, Borsellino. And that man. Hey, I'm not dreaming. King of the North Sea, Rogers Darren. The Navy monster that killed, World Destroyer, Bondi Waldo, many legendary pirates have suffered at his hands. Wait, Darren killed Bondi Waldo, is his target the Momo Fruit? Damn it, how could the monsters of the Navy Headquarters appear here? At this time, Charlotte Perosparrow had cold sweats on her back. Admiral of the Navy, Buddha Sengoku, is a peak powerhouse at the same level as her, invincible, mother. Damn, it's actually the Admiral of the Navy. In a huge pit on the ground not far away, Charlotte Daifuku crawled out of it covered in blood, her face was swollen, and a pool of blood spit out of her mouth. He and Charlotte Perosparrow exchanged glances. On the other side, Jin's eyes suddenly became extremely solemn under his mask. The three exchanged glances with each other. Although there was no word, they quickly determined the same goal. The Navy. The Navy even dispatched the admirals. Only if they joined forces could they fight against the Navy and take the Momo fruit from them. The next second, the three did not hesitate and acted at the same time. Jin jumped up in one step, and his figure quickly changed in midair, transforming into a black toothless pterosaur. Long wings, a beak-like head, and a blazing red flame burning on his body. Flame Emperor. Several fireballs suddenly shot out from the vibrating wings and whistled towards Darren and the other two. Charlotte Perosparrow shouted coldly and waved the candy cane in her hand heavily. Large pink candy spreads out like a tsunami, drowned towards the wreckage of Boat 3A. Wiping away the blood on the corner of his mouth, summoned the blue lamp demon again, and drank a magnificent sword chi and broke the air. It was so strong like a monster. Facing the joining of the three cadres, Pelusolino was having a rare diligence and ridiculing, and the figure turned into a dazzling golden light. The figure was lined and his arms opened. Countless golden light bullets were shot out like a violent storm, colliding heavily with the attacks of the three people in midair. Boom boom boom. The dull explosions continued, and large balls of flames and black smoke billowed out. The entire auction hall was swept by a strong wind like purgatory, blowing everyone to the left and right. Then, two balls of light, one black and one gold, penetrated the thick smoke at an astonishing speed and collided violently. Bang! The feet of Jin and Borsellino, who had transformed into human forms, wrestled fiercely in midair, exploding a surging wave of air. Monster of the Navy headquarters. Borsellino, I have heard your name many times. Jin's eyes flashed with fighting spirit. Really? Borsellino glanced at him with a half-smile. You wrapped your body so tightly that I can't tell what race you are. I always feel that you are a species I have never seen before. Jin's pupils shrank, and then he gritted his teeth and said, You are looking for death. He suddenly drew his sword. The roaring red flames were like a mad dragon, wrapped around the blade of the huge long sword, and slashed heavily at the rear admiral in front of him. Oh, it seems that I guessed something. Borsellino calmly clasped his hands together, dragged out a golden lightsaber from his palm, and swung the sword to block. Aim no Kurosakumo sword. Clang clang clang. The figures of the two kept turning and moving in the air, turning into phantoms at a speed that could not be captured by the eyes, and kept fighting. The collision of swords splashed large sparks. On the other side, Charlotte Perosparrow and Charlotte Daifuku also supported the waves of candy and jumped in front of Darren and Sengoku. So what if they are admirals? Let me see the admiral's strength. They said with a grin. But the next second, a huge golden Buddha light rose in front of them, occupying all their vision. Just you guys. Fight, fight. The crowd became extremely chaotic, there were bursts of horrified exclamations. They looked at the Navy and the two pirate groups fighting in horror, and the auction house that was in turmoil and seemed to collapse at any time, and their hearts were filled with turmoil. No. If this goes on, we will all die. Quick, run away. Run away. If we don't run away, we will all die here. Quote. The pirates from the New World tried to retreat with pale faces, scrambling to squeeze towards the exit of the auction house. If they were facing a Navy unit led by an ordinary vice admiral, they would not be afraid and would still have the strength to fight. But now even the admirals of the Navy have come, they don't even have the courage to fight. But not everyone chose to run away. Ha 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 ha. Momo fruit, I'll take it. The bald pirate named Barbarian Bear suddenly laughed and jumped out of the crowd and rushed to the auction table. Not only him. Dozens of pirates who thought they were strong also took the same action. The scene was in chaos. The navy had been held back by the leaders of the two great pirate groups, Big Katakana Middle Mom and 100 Beasts. This also meant that now was the best time to snatch the Momo fruit. The crowd rushed forward. Quick! Protect the auction items. The auctioneer in a tuxedo screamed in fear. Dozens of security guards in black suits descended from the sky, holding all kinds of weapons and ammunition in their hands, and set up a defense line around the Momo fruit behind them. Fire like crazy. Ask for everything, thank you very much.